links up to that I'm sure we're going to get to. A lot of reading, I think. So people should have some good stuff to chew on.
Yeah, that'd be great. I was just opening up all the filings, and I'm trying to remember where we left off at. It seems like we have a lot of filings to talk about as well. So,
Yeah, we were waiting for the um, judge's decision on the oh geez, I'm blanking on
privilege
privilege. Thank
documents.
you. That's the word. And looks like, well, who knows? The way things come out in the middle of the night now, maybe something will drop. But there's lots of other stuff that's come up today. I think it's gonna be really good to talk about.
Yeah, well, we can go ahead and start getting into it a little bit. We have a couple hundred people signed up, so I'm sure more people will be joining us. And I think real quick, I'll just try to recap some of all the filings that we have, and obviously we got the witness list today. So for those people that been working all day and they haven't been keeping up with this stuff, um, so let's see here. A few days ago, we started getting some motions from the government and from the defense objecting to trial exhibits. So we have the government filing against Michael Sussman. There wasn't a whole lot uh, in that filing that I think we learned. Sussman is apparently planning or attempting to introduce a bunch of news articles into evidence for the trial, which is pretty outrageous. Actually, once you start digging into these articles, you see that some of the same names that we had on, on the Fusion GPS emails last week are some of the same articles that Sussman wants to introduce into the case. So Tom Hamburger is the classic example where they're trying to bring in articles from Tom Hamburger uh, to support in some fashion the defense that Sussman wants to put on. So that's pretty laughable. I don't really see that coming in, but we'll see. Um, and then the government objected to. Let's see what else there was. That's pretty much it. I don't know. I think the government kind of raised the March 2017 items as well. But obviously, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second here because the defense went and they objected as well to some trial exhibits that John Durham wanted to use. And then there's a few other motions here. So one of the other things that Sussman team did was they're trying to bring in this body of evidence from March 2017, where apparently Andrew McCabe and a few others at a particular meeting at the FBI took some notes. And at this meeting, which is, of course, 6 months after the charged offense in this case, 6 months later, they noted that Sussman had brought these allegations on behalf of some client or some unnamed client or something to that effect. So there's been a lot of discussion on that over Twitter over the last few days, or I guess today, as it relates to these notes. And are they substantive? Are they relevant? My personal opinion is they're not relevant and they're not exculpatory because what was known to the FBI 6 months after Sussman lied to the FBI really isn't relevant. It's not. It doesn't go into anybody's state of mind or the procedures and steps that the FBI took. And what ultimately is material about the false statement is that the FBI did undertake procedures. And we got these notes that indicate that the FBI hired two private companies actually to investigate these Trump Alpha server pings that Sussman brought to the FBI. So obviously the FBI took it seriously. I mean, they jumped on these allegations, they ran them down, they debunked them, and they had debunked them by February, and then a month after that, for sure, apparently there was a meeting at the FBI, and McCabe had some piece of information where he noted clients, and I believe I forget who pointed that out, but there is a note where there's an S on that. So McCabe apparently knew that Sussman had brought these allegations on behalf of multiple clients, which is pretty interesting. And McCabe will have to defend that. And I think it was left open today in a motion about trial witnesses, whether or not McCabe would actually be called to testify, which would be pretty interesting to have him under oath especially on cross-examination from John Durham. So that's the other motion, other article I think worth talking about today. So Washington Times, I think they must have had somebody in the courtroom. So they got a hold of the witness list, and let me run through some names here. So Robbie Mook, Mark Elias, Bill Priestap, and James Baker are all going to be government witnesses. And Technofog has kind of been covering this pretty closely. We have information already that Mark Elias was subject to a grand jury, so that's not a big surprise. Robbie Mook, we knew had been interviewed. We didn't actually know, I don't think, that he had been before a grand jury, and I think Techno pointed that out a little bit earlier. So that's pretty interesting to have those two testifying as government witnesses. And then, let's see here. Yeah, so the government will also try to put on Laura Sego, which is Fusion GPS. Deborah Fine, which is a Clinton campaign lawyer, which is really interesting. A lot of people were discussing that today. And then a CIA official identified as Kevin B. We don't know who that is. And then a whole host of FBI agents, which will probably go to materiality and all the steps they took as a result of these allegations. So then on the defense side, the defense and the Sussman team plan to call Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General, which is pretty interesting, former Assistant Attorney General Mary McCord, and Eric Lichtblau, who was at the center of all this as a reporter for the New York Times, where he was actually interfacing with the FBI early on. Fusion GPS. He was trying to get a story printed in the New York Times. New York Times kind of shot that down, but he's really central to this whole series of allegations. So he's going to be a defense witness. That's pretty interesting. MB, I mean, if you have any thoughts, go ahead and jump in. Kind of get everybody's thoughts and opinions. That one thing we are still waiting on. There's supposed to be a ruling on 38 emails that were subject to privilege claims, and we talked about that last week on the last chat. And we're still waiting on a ruling. And a few people have suggested that the can might be kicked down the road because one of the other filings that we got was a motion from the judge yesterday, or a ruling from the judge excluding some of the evidence that Durham intended to present as relates to some of the third-party conspirators that were not that are not central to the case, as it were, or are not CC'd on communications from Sussman. So, MB, I mean, if you have any thoughts, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, definitely. I think I put the link up to the Washington Times story, and everybody should check that out because we don't have the transcripts from the hearing yet, but it looks pretty solid. And the McCabe stuff, I think, was what was kind of really interesting. And I agree with you that it's really far afield, and I don't know how that's going to get in or what it would even indicate aside from just creating a bunch of smoke and trying to confuse the jury, which maybe is their best move. But the problem with McCabe is like you said, it's 6 months later. There's no telling, who got that idea in their heads. If it was maybe McCabe personally had some knowledge of that Sussman worked for the Democrats and he just brought that to the table based on his own knowledge. That's a scenario, but there's other scenarios that are just as, possible with that. So without anybody on the stand to explain themselves, it's really going to be hard to, read the tea leaves of what those notes mean, especially since they're handwritten. And if you look at them, it's really, difficult to kind of see some of the nuances of what's actually being written. It's, kind of some scrawl going on. I also put up a link to Hans and Jeff have a really good article in the Epoch Times that should check out. And it's regarding the FBI notes and how that plays in with the timeline, which is that's where I think things maybe Hans would come up and speak because he's really on top of this stuff. And I think that if you look at how the timing comes together with Trump coming out to talk about being wiretapped at Trump Towers and the FBI getting together and kind of panicking over all this stuff, it really gives you a sense of what's going on. And I think that's really going to come into play.
Yeah, I haven't got a chance to read that article. I definitely want to read that. Everybody should check that out. MB, I think, is linking it to this chat. Yeah, there it is. So Jeff Carlson tweeted that out. So that's always good. Yeah, as it relates to Andrew McCabe, I don't. There's so many theories, right? I mean, there's a million possibilities of how he would have come to that information, or it's entirely plausible that's just thrown off the cuff and just something he inferred. I mean, a random lawyer brings information to the FBI to describe 6 months later that he brought some information on behalf of clients. I mean, that doesn't actually tell you much. I mean, that's not, you can throw that off the cuff a little bit and say, well, he didn't do it himself, right? Obviously, he had some clients, but it's hard to, you can't really speculate on it because you don't know what Andrew McCabe was thinking. But one thing I was thinking about earlier, footnotes 223 and 461 of the IG Horowitz report have some relation to these allegations, and they have some relationship to Rodney Joffe, I believe, in that it describes a former CHS beginning in late July 2016 who brought some allegations to the FBI, specifically a list of Trump associates, which is a description that's come up as it relates to Rodney Joffe and Michael Sussman and certain information they were bringing around that time. And we have some descriptions. I think Paul Sperry has an article out describing this list of Trump associates and that, it's several Trump officials. We don't have a specific number, but apparently, according to Paul Sperry, it includes Carter Page, it includes Manafort, Papadopoulos, and General Flynn, I believe. So it's really interesting to me because what these footnotes describe is that sometime in mid to late September 2016, McCabe shuts down this former CHS. And, I've thrown this out as speculation before. If this list of Trump associates is, let's say, 6 associates, and 4 of them are opened investigations for Andrew McCabe, and 2 others are people he's looking at very closely at that time, it should set off alarm bells in his head. Like, there's no way something that fortuitous could just come across your desk. And to have that list of Trump associates come through with information relating to their emails, their DNS activities, and a whole host of that type of information, that would have to set off red flags and alarm bells for Andrew McCabe. But then around that same time, Sussman's coming to the FBI with allegations related to this Trump server. And, I don't know if there's some crossover there or if there's like a series of dots that McCabe would be able to connect to say, okay, well, Sussman and this former CHS are bringing in similar information. They have the same client or the same motivations, or they're working together. I don't know if that's the case. I think there's some. I think the ground is solid enough to speculate that Andrew McCabe, there's more to the story about this former CHS. The footnotes are pretty clear that it is something related to Rodney Joffe and Michael Sussman, but we just don't have enough information, I think, to say conclusively.
Hey, Undead, you're breaking up there a little bit.
I gotcha.
Sorry about that. But let me jump in the meantime real quick and just say that the other, I think, big surprise witness that the defense wanted to put on is IG Horowitz as a witness for the defense, which is very interesting. I think a lot of people are wondering what he's going to bring that's going to be relevant to the case. I think we'd all like to get Horowitz on the witness stand and have him just be able to ask him all kinds of questions, but I'm sure that's not going to be something that judge is going to allow. But if he does make it on the stand, that could be very interesting because I don't know. I'm sure King has a better idea of what him and actually what the McCabe letter could actually, in practice, mean for this case, as aside to just our bigger thoughts and speculations.
You ask him now, or are we going to save that for later?
We can do anything you want, King. If you want to comment on that or anything else, go ahead.
Let's push that back a little bit. I think the bigger issue, the bigger news is the court's decision on the outstanding evidentiary motions and issues that came out over the weekend. And it has a major impact on Durham's case and the parameters of the case. Step back a minute. If anybody's heard these before, heard me before on these chats, Durham would like to put on a case that, to the greatest extent possible, avoids the uh, ingrained bias that he thinks he's going to have with a DC jury. He wants to avoid being in a position where the defense can argue that, look, the only thing that mattered here was the data. And the data was sufficiently serious and sufficiently concerning that, as a matter of counterintelligence and national security, the FBI had to look at it, and it didn't matter who Sussman's client was. So when he lied about having a client, or had he told him a lie about who the client was, it didn't matter. It wasn't material because the data itself drove the investigation. And the fact that Hillary may have been behind some of it, or Jaffe may have been behind some of it, didn't really matter to the FBI. They took the data and they did what they did with it, ran it to ground as they should have. And therefore, the lie, if he made a lie, wasn't material and he should be acquitted. That's the defense case. And that plays to a DC jury that, by and large, a good percentage of them will probably still hold the view that there was something behind these Trump-Russia collusion allegations. Maybe not enough to bring a criminal case, maybe not enough to get Trump impeached, but there was something there and it needed to be looked at. That's the mindset of many of the jurors that are going to try this case. To avoid that, or to convince that kind of a jury that this was a lie and it was material, Durham hoped to be able to paint a picture of a scheme, a planned, organized effort with Sussman in the middle, but involving Jaffe and his Georgia Tech researchers, involving the Clinton campaign, and involving Perkins Coie, and involving Fusion GPS, and even Christopher Steele, to create, maybe out of whole cloth, opposition research that could be fed to the press and fed to the FBI. To make that work, it was essential that Sussman lie about where it all originated and who was behind it. So the defense filed motions in limine to exclude from evidence various emails, emails by Fusion GPS to various members of the press, telling the press about this amazing discovery by these technical people that there was this heretofore unknown link between Trump and Russia using a back channel communication with the Alpha Bank. And here's the data. We have experts who've packaged the data, and you can look at it and you can talk to them, that will prove that existed. looking for favorable press on that issue. That's one set of emails. Another set of emails were emails that the Jaffe and his researchers and the tea leaves person, April Lorenz, passed amongst each other as they were putting or packaging the data together into something that could be presented to both the FBI and the press, and expressing concerns to each other about the data. Some would raise issues like, who's going to believe this? If somebody is experienced and knowledgeable about DNS data, they will see that may look like a red herring. Or what about the possibility that this is all spoofed, that somebody's created the appearance of a communication channel by hacking somebody's computer and spoofing it? That's possible. Or maybe one side creating a fake, some sort of fake email communication with a form and passing it to one computer or the other, which launches a sequence of lookup pings back and forth. That could be what we're looking at. None of that is really negated or addressed in the data we've presented. So you have to be, but there are experts who could see through it. That's a concern. It was that type of email exchange that Durham wanted to use to show, one, the data itself was sketchy. Nevertheless, the orchestrated plan was to package it and present it to the FBI as if it was stellar, as if it were something that legitimately needed to be investigated without telling them the whole story. And two, present it to the press so they can get Hillary good press and dirty up her opponent, Trump. The judge kind of split that baby in two. Judge said, yes, Mr. Durham, you can present the emails that went out to the press because you're not offering them for the truth of what's in them. You're offering them to show this pattern of opposition research publication that the Clinton campaign was behind. And therefore, it's intrinsically part of the offense you've charged. You've shown the reason why Sussman might have lied, and this paints the whole picture. As to the data itself, I'm not going to let you get into that because, one, I've already ruled that the data, Mr. Durham, you have told me, I'm talking as the judge now, Mr. Durham, you have previously said you're not here to put the data on trial. You're going to put on evidence of what the FBI did to investigate it, but that's all. You're going to give the jury what the FBI found, but we're not going to have a mini trial about how accurate the data was, whether anybody falsified it or cherry picked it or did something bad to it to intentionally mislead the FBI. That's not going to be part of this case. And because I've already said that, I'm not going to let you put all these emails that are hearsay back and forth between the researchers and Jaffe because they've really addressed the issue of how reliable and how valid is the data. There is an exception to the hearsay rule that you say they can come in under. That would be they are not hearsay. They're an exception to the hearsay because they are communications by members of a joint venture or a conspiracy, not necessarily a criminal conspiracy, but a group of people operating towards a common goal. That goal being to present this data to the press and to the FBI, regardless of how valid it is. That on paper, that does sound like a joint venture type conspiracy that would apply and create an exception to the hearsay rule. But you're getting the trial so far afield of the essential issues. Did he lie? And was it material? That it could confuse the jury. So I'm not going to let you do it. I'm going to exercise my discretion to keep that out. So Durham got one wing clipped substantially, but did keep the other one intact. That is the one that gets his evidence about the communications to the press.
Yeah, that's a good summary. And if anybody hasn't had a chance to read that, you should definitely check out the docket and pull that up. I mean, there's a lot of nuances to what the judge actually ruled, as King just laid out. I mean, certain statements are going to be allowed in. It would have been really nice to get some of these co-conspirator statements that Durham's laid out and get those into evidence, but I don't think Durham really needs it. I mean, this is really just a simple false statement charge. Um, so Sussman lied to the FBI. That's really not in dispute at all anymore. There's a lot of evidence to that effect. And as King pointed out, I mean, Baker's going to go on the witness stand, and Baker's going to say that Sussman testified or asserted that he was not representing anybody. And if Baker is shaky at all, then all these other prior consistent statements and notes are going to come into the body of evidence. That's basically what the judge laid out. So if Baker doesn't remember, then we have some handwritten notes that were taken contemporaneously around that time. And we have a text message, which is going to come in from the day before of this meeting, which is just explicit. There's no question about it. Sussman lied. Then it goes into materiality. Is this lie the inclusion or the omission of information? Does that change a decision at the FBI? And it uncontrovertibly it does. That's the threshold of materiality. You know, does it change somebody's decision? And it absolutely does. Because if the FBI knew conclusively, with no suspicion, conclusively knew that Clinton was the source of this information, or that Clinton was sending Sussman to the FBI with information, it would have prompted questions, right? You're 60 days from an election. The FBI would have said, whoa, 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 let's slow down here and let's go back. Give me all the sourcing. Who have you been talking to? Where'd you get the data? And, what type of corroboration can you give us? And of course, that's why Sussman lied, right? Because if it didn't matter, Sussman would have just told him the truth. Because Sussman knew that to get his objectives obtained, he had to tell them he was not representing anybody. He couldn't tell them the truth to get what he wanted to get. So it's material in Sussman's mind. It's material in Sussman's mind for him to lie, because otherwise he would have just told the truth. Not to beat that up. I don't know if that's confusing or not, but that's the way I would certainly think of it. So yeah, a lot of good points there. MB, I don't know if you want to jump in with anything else on that.
I just had one thing for King, that the defense is also not allowed. Well, if the defense decides to say that the data is true, is it correct that then opens the door that Durham can come back and say, well, wait a minute, now let's talk about if that is correct or not?
Yes, he has said, the judge has said this several times, that you understand, Mr. Sussman and your lawyer team, if you try to make the case that the data is correct, it's not rigged in any way, it's reliable, I'm going to let the prosecution come back and show that may not be the case. So you will, if you open the door, I'm going to let the prosecution come back and we'll try that issue that you tell me you don't want to try.
King, I wanted to ask you another question here. So we've been waiting a few days on this privilege ruling for the 38 emails. Now, based on what the judge ruled yesterday, I believe it was, that a lot of these communications are going to be excluded from trial, there's sort of a question out there from a few people whether the judge is going to pass on this altogether, because he might indicate that these emails are not going to be relevant to the trial. But do you think he should rule on the privilege claim itself and then, say, Mr. Durham, you're entitled to these emails that were subject to grand jury subpoena, but they're not going to be admitted into this trial? Is that the most likely scenario that you see, or do you see the judge actually potentially kicking this down the road and not ruling on it?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. Some judges will hit the privilege issue head on and decide it, even though most or all of the emails may not come in under the judge's ruling from yesterday. But because, I mean, Durham made it clear that he needs this privilege issue decided because he's still got an investigation ongoing. And it's going to be key towards what evidence he can present to the grand jury going forward. So it needs to be decided one way or the other for Durham to proceed. But as far as this trial is concerned, the judge very well could decide that the privilege issue as to these 38 documents or 38 emails I'm looking at is moot because I've already ruled none of these emails come into evidence. But since we haven't seen the emails, we can't even say that. We just have to cross our fingers and hope he says something.
Now, he would still have to rule on Laura Seago, because there's technically privilege claims over her testimony, right?
Yes. One witness is copied on one or more of the emails he's reviewing. That's Laura Seago, who's a former employee of Fusion GPS. The Clinton campaign has asserted a privilege Jaffe has asserted a privilege as to the meeting Jaffe attended with Sussman and Elias and Laura Seago, claiming that he believed he was there talking to his lawyers in confidence, that Ms. Seago was a consultant of the law firm, and therefore everything he said and to the lawyers and that they said back to him was privileged. So if she's going to be called to testify about what was said at that meeting, the privilege issue will have to be decided. I don't see the judge deciding that in the abstract until he hears Ms. Seago's testimony. He may decide the privilege as it relates to her email communications that Jaffe got a copy of. But we don't know yet.
Gotcha. Thank you. MB, I don't know if you have anything else you want to get into. Otherwise, I might open up for a couple questions.
I was going to throw up the Wall Street Journal article. I know that's a little bit off the current topic, but that's another subject of today's discussion. So I'll get that up if anybody hasn't seen it. It's kind of about the evolution of the Steele dossier. Not this particular court case, but it's interesting.
Yeah, everybody should definitely check that out. I know some people have expressed some concerns with that. Definitely check out Hans. I think Hans has some really good thoughts on that article and some good breakdown. But I guess I had a different kind of opinion. I thought it was a pretty good article. So this is specifically written about Danchenko, Dolan, and Galkina, and there's certainly other topics to write about, right? I mean, they could easily talk about Sergei Milian and the horrendous deal that they did to him. Even the Wall Street Journal, if they're going to write an article about Danchenko, they could have made some amends by correcting the record on Milian tonight. So that would have been nice. Obviously, there's a lot to write about Christopher Steele and what he did with the Steele dossier and what he did with any information that Danchenko gave him or didn't give him, and what fabrications that Steele did. There's a lot to say on that topic as well. But for this specific article, being that it's titled Three Friends Chatting and it's specific about Danchenko, Dolan, and Galkina, I thought it was good. I thought, if there's a regular 9 to 5 American out there that has not been following this at all, I thought that was a really well done article. I think there were a couple discrepancies where they didn't quite get the dates right, but it is very thorough. It's a very long article. I think they obviously put quite a bit of time into it, in my opinion, at least. And I hope they write more. I saw Svetlana tweet out. I mean, yeah, these guys were kind of involved in some bad reporting before, but when they write something good, I'm going to praise them for that, and hopefully they do more. I mean, there's a million other topics for them to write about, right? And I don't want to bash them when they finally write a decent article. I want to encourage them. I want them to write more. So, all right. Take a question here or a comment. Dirty Tricks, what's up, man? Nope. Guess not. Let's go to. Hey, Elizabeth. How's it going? Hey, Elizabeth.
Hello, everybody. Great topic, great discussion tonight, guys. I follow most of this pretty closely, but nowhere near to the extent that you do. So my question is, you were mentioning that Mook and who was the other one will be witnesses for the prosecution. I can't remember now who the other person was, but are those people going to be Elias? Are they going to be cooperating witnesses, or are they hostile witnesses? And whichever it is, how will that affect the trial and the outcome? And I'll turn off and listen. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. When I first saw those names come up in the story, I thought for sure they would be defense witnesses, right? But I imagine what I think the most likely scenario is that Durham's bringing these witnesses in for very specific purposes. Robbie Mook, we have testimony where he was not aware. Well, I guess that part's not even relevant. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to say. I imagine the purposes are going to be very limited. I think there's a lot of speculation out there that Mark Elias himself might face some criminal liability. So it is really interesting that he's willing to sit before a grand jury and now sit for a trial and testify about something. And I don't know. I don't know the questions that are going to be asked to him. But him and Robbie Mook testifying, obviously, that is pretty interesting. I don't think it's going to be a broad discussion. they're not going to be friendly witnesses, but Durham's not going to let them be hostile witnesses. He's not going to let them talk about how Trump had all these connections with Russia or anything like that. It's going to be a really narrow focus, in my opinion, at least. MB or King, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I do have a few. There are actually three witnesses in that category. There's Robbie Mook, Mark Elias, and a woman by the name of Debbie Fine, who was, I think her title was Assistant General Counsel of the Hillary campaign in charge of special projects. Let me start with Mook. Mook has been cooperating with Durham, we know, because he's given statements. He signed an affidavit in support of the Clinton campaign's motion to intervene in the case to assert attorney-client privilege as to everything that Fusion GPS did. And the affidavit basically said, in very general terms, the campaign's purpose in retaining Perkins Coie was to get legal services in anticipation of litigation, and I understood that they would be associating a contractor like Fusion GPS to help them do the research needed to give us, the campaign, legal advice. That kind of tells me that Mook's role will be very limited to establish the attorney-client relationship between the campaign and Perkins Coie, and in general, describe in very general terms what Perkins Coie job was, what Fusion's job was relative to Perkins Coie, to show that, yeah, there was a attorney-client relationship involving Sussman, and that the Clinton campaign was the client. Elias would testify. He testified at the grand jury, and he would probably say the same thing, but more elaborate as to what Mook said. A lot of his affidavit or declaration that was filed on the privilege issue was redacted, so we don't know what all he had to say on the record there. But I imagine he's going to be repeating a lot of it in front of the jury when Durham calls them, to establish, one, that there was an attorney-client relationship. He was the lead lawyer. Sussman was on the case too. This is how we build the file. These are the bills we sent out. These are the timesheets that Sussman filled out showing he was working for the campaign. The most interesting one that we know nothing about, really, is Debbie Fine. She's listed as a witness for the prosecution. Being a lawyer in charge of special projects is kind of a hint that she knew about or had some very high level executive role in what I call and what they called the Trump Swift Boat Project, whereby the Clinton campaign kind of orchestrated a hit, an opposition research driven hit on Trump involving his relationships with Russia. And if she was involved as the leader of the special projects group in overseeing the broad parameters of the Swift Boat project against Trump, then she can paint the big picture. This is what we were trying to do. These are the lawyers we hired to do it. These are the contractors we knew the lawyers were associating to do it with. And it kind of paints the broad conspiracy picture that the judge says he doesn't want to hear. But the Durham may be able to get by with doing it with a uh, the clients, the Clinton campaign as client person in charge of the whole scheme.
It's good stuff. MB, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add on that?
I was just thinking that when Mark Elias submitted his motion to uh, join the case, he submitted I think it was like 7 or 8 pages of mostly redacted material, and I think he wanted the judge to review it privately. And I was really curious what might have been under those redactions, and because we know he was in front of the grand jury, so they assumedly have him locked down with the testimony they need. And I guess my point is he's making a big stink about just what was available in that motion was very anti-Trump and sort of Spygate centric. So I guess it could be dangerous for both sides. Like, what's he going to stay on stage? Is he going to stay right on message? Is everything, is it going to be a 15-minute examination? That's going to be it, or could that be a place where the door kind of gets open because the defense goes, whoever goes into it, but they start talking more about the big picture Spygate stuff.
I thought I saw the judge rule that motion had to be unredacted and refiled. Am I misremembering that?
And it's still redacted right now, but unless there's a separate entry.
Okay, I might be wrong. I thought the judge had said no, you gotta unredact and just file this thing, but
it was weird. I just had this kind of feeling of like, Judge, let me explain a few things. If I could just sit down with you, we could clear this whole thing up. It's like, I don't think that's how it works.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of, I don't know. I can't imagine saying that to a judge or filing something and just saying, Judge, if you want to see this, you got to make a private appointment with me in your chambers. Like, it's ridiculous. Let's see who else we got here. Mitt, what's going on, man?
Hey, were you guys talking to me? This is Mitt.
Yeah.
Hey, good. How are you guys doing? Thanks for throwing me a mic. So earlier today in this corner, I think someone published some tweets of Trump with the reaction from the FBI. I think you guys talked a little bit about it, about how they were starting to panic a little bit. And a lot of stuff was flying back and forth when he started throwing around the spy word. And how about that Obama guy? He's a bad guy. And I think that was all a result of Admiral Rogers, and it's been described as his sprint over to Trump Tower. But I'm trying to figure out what was the onus. What was the thing that tipped over the apple cart for Rogers? Because I know way back in 2016, he knew there was some 702 violations taking place and private contractor issues and stuff. And I think he slapped some hands and said, "Hey, you can't do that anymore." And then again in October, a whistleblower came forward and said, "Hey, I know you think you handled it, but you didn't handle it. And there's some pretty significant stuff still happening." And that caused him to actually head over to the FISC and finally had to tell them, because I think he was pressured into it once that whistleblower came out. And but unluckily, the FISC had already, like literally moments before, issued the FISA on Carter Page. So he knows there's a lot of issues. But what do you think it was? What did he see that caused him to bang it on over to Trump and really kind of lay it out on the line and say, "Hey, you've got some problems. You should get out of here"?
Yeah, so it's not compelling anymore that Rogers actually said anything important. I know there's been public reporting to that effect. I know it's been out there for a long time. I think Walk of Fire put out a thread a couple weeks ago, and that the whole idea that Trump moved his headquarters because Rogers gave him a heads up about surveillance at Trump Tower. I don't think that's compelling anymore. I think, from what I recollect, Walker kind of laid out, Trump was already going to move, or the facilities were inadequate where he was at, or whatever the case was. Like, I think that was already in motion. And I would also say, I mean, nothing's developed out of that story. I mean, Michael Rogers, if he thought there was surveillance, like, where's he been for the last 6 years? He hasn't
Right.
come forward at all. There's been no corroboration of that, no subsequent reporting. So I don't know. Obviously, I can't discount it or anything. I can't debunk it, but I'm not convinced that Rogers actually said, anything nearly as substantive as what's been reported. Not to throw cold water on that, but I
Do
just
you
can't
think
say
that
one
was the
way or the other.
basis for? Do you think that was the basis for Trump coming out that next day and firing off? Just really throwing the spy word in everybody's faces, or do you think he had another basis beside what Rogers had said to him?
There's so much stuff going on around that time. I can't say for sure. I mean, he
Yeah,
had to be picking up some information. He had to have some ideas, given the number of leaks, right? I mean, the first 3 months of his administration, he basically had a leak every single day, like a major
yeah.
leak. So he had to have some idea that people were, if not just leaking, like people were listening to conversations. And I don't know. I can't speculate one way or the other. Maybe somebody was speculating to him, and then he kind of ran with it, or maybe somebody gave him some
I only
concrete
thought of it because
information.
of the. I only thought of it because of the current topic of the Alpha Bank stuff, and he knew about the 702 stuff for so long. Like you said, he'd been around for 6 years. I'm just wondering if he ran into anything about the Alpha Bank story, or if he got some information on that, and that's what caused him to, to actually finally mosey up there and say something.
You're talking about Rogers?
Yeah. Did he get it from somebody else? Did he bump into it? Did he hear something? I wonder if it was the Alpha Bank thing that caused that to happen.
Yeah, I can't speculate one way or the other.
I
Right.
can. I think if it was the Alpha Bank stuff that triggered Trump into that tweet, uh, it more than likely came from the CIA and Mike Pompeo.
See, Trump's not a guy that keeps secrets, though, especially about something like that. Like, I have to imagine if Trump had some hard information, like, he wouldn't be able to resist. Like, he would have pushed
Yeah.
something out, But maybe he has been sitting on it for years now.
I think that kind of could add up though, because you're right that if Rogers came to him and said, "Hey, look, the FISA court's spying on you," then Trump's going to go out 10 minutes later and say the FISA court's spying on me. So it could be that if Pompeo came to him with just sort of the allegations that Sussman made that were a little bit more, they probably didn't have a lot of details to him either, and who knows what Pompeo was actually told. But that could be just a more, hey, Trump Tower, they say they got this DNS stuff and whatever, and Trump wouldn't understand it either. So that might actually line up.
Yeah, then that's exactly what I was thinking. That's what I wanted to hear. But I like the CIA version. That sounds better. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Ship, how's it going?
Not too bad. On the move thing, I remember looking at that, quite a while ago. Yeah, my recollection is, and I don't have my materials in front of me, the timing of that was after the election. It was during the transition. And the transition headquarters were moved from the Trump Tower to the New Jersey golf course. And the reason for that was once he was president-elect, a whole new set of Secret Service priorities took over. And the reality was they couldn't block off streets of Manhattan around Trump Tower while he was there. And they couldn't allow the president-elect to be in a high-rise office building in the middle of Manhattan when car bombs could park next to it. It just was an unsustainable location for the Secret Service. So the plan to move to New Jersey which had a big defensible perimeter, and Trump wanted to stay on one of his own properties where he was comfortable. I mean, that was simply the plan. It took a little while to execute that plan, but leaving Trump Tower had nothing to do with Admiral Rogers' visit. That was already in the works, and it was because of just the Secret Service could not allow the president-elect to do business in a high-rise office building in downtown Manhattan.
Yeah, good stuff. Let's take another question here. Golden Advice, what's up, man?
Hey, how y'all doing this evening? I just want to.
Pretty good. How are
I'm
you?
doing great. I just want to speak to how Admiral Rogers, and there are many like him, have kind of disappeared and fallen off the, out of the public square over the last 6 years. And given the amount of pressure, and we know the depths of utter corruption that has taken over our government, it just feels like, where's the courage? What kind of pressure is being applied to people that were once so into the weeds and this stuff? You go back to Admiral Rogers, you go back to Rosemary Collier's, who issued the FISA report. And it just, all this stuff has just been whitewashed, and none of these people have ever spoken up. And there's many of them. I'm just giving a couple examples, but I think that's what disturbs me the most, especially in retrospect, 6 years later, as we look around and see what's happening around us. And I can't help but speculate what kind of enormous pressure some of these people are under. And I don't think we'll ever know, but it sure does make you wonder. So I just wanted to put that out there, and I'll go ahead and mute myself and listen to y'all again.
Yeah, thanks for the comments. I mean, it's hard to make heads or tails of it one way or the other, I think. Let's go to Fauci. Fauci, how's it going, man?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Hey, can you hold on a second?
We got all day. No worries, brother.
Sorry, man. My wife is calling me right as you. Okay, so hey, you guys know I follow Mark Elias pretty closely, and you're just talking about him, and so I've been trying to keep up. I'm putting kids to bed and stuff, but he tweeted something kind of cryptic a few months back. You guys might remember it. Something about there's so much I wanted to say for the last 24 hours. And I just can't say it, but just let me leave it at this. I'm still with her. Obviously that's, kind of cryptic, and who the hell knows what he was talking about. But now that we know he's, we learned since then that he's on the grand jury, and he is now going to be testifying for the prosecution. Does anybody have any thoughts on what that might have meant? When he did that? That's it. I'll hang up.
All of these people have been before the grand jury. Just because we don't know about it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Durham would not be putting somebody like Elias, or who was the other one that came out today, Kimberly, what's her name? With Open Society, the George Soros group, who's on his witness list.
Debbie Fine, I think.
Debbie Fine. They've all been before the grand jury. You don't put potentially hostile witnesses on the stand during your case in chief unless you've already locked them in to testimony under oath before the grand jury, and you've got that transcript right there next to you as you ask them questions that you know what the answers should be based upon the grand jury testimony. These people had individual conversations, maybe, with Sussman. That's what they're going to testify about. That's what's going to be asked about. And it's kind of a misnomer, I think, sometimes, or misunderstood reference to call somebody a government witness. Yeah, you don't have a choice. I used to send subpoenas to hostile witnesses all the time. It didn't make them friendly to me because they were on my witness list and they were appearing during the government's case in chief. You know, they were just witnesses. They knew stuff that I wanted the jury to hear. They didn't have to be friendly. So, you know, to see individuals like Elias and Fine and whoever else turn up on Durham's witness list, not surprising. Those are the people that Sussman would have been in communication with. They can testify about things that Sussman said, things that Sussman wrote and sent to them that they received, and you know, matters like that. I saw also a tweet a little while ago about Horowitz showing up, and he's going to testify as to what the IG did. It's like, no, he's not. He's going to testify about people he talked to and documents he saw or sent, not the conclusions of the inspector general. Those are irrelevant. The only thing that witnesses can testify to is facts. Off my soapbox. Back to the crowd.
It's good stuff. I like it. I see we have Fool Nelson chat. I don't know, Fool, if you wanted to speak tonight. I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything that you want to speak about, too. Let's see who else we have here.
I saw
that one
Hans.
guy. What's up, man?
I'd like to hear from Hans.
Yeah, he's at his desktop right now. He's not able to speak. That one guy. What's up, man?
Hey guys, how's everyone doing tonight?
Pretty good. How are you?
Oh, good, man. Great chat as always. Appreciate the chance to speak. Just want to say thank you. I have a quick question and sort of a comment, about Sussman intending to use the March 2017 notes, saying that McCabe referenced that Sussman was representing an undisclosed client and how the FBI knew that at the time. If I were defending Sussman, there's obvious value in showing that Sussman's, at issue false statement couldn't influence the investigation because the FBI knew that it wasn't true. But the timeline is where I sort of have the disconnect because the FBI disproved the Alpha allegations in February 2017 per Horowitz. So that's my comment. My question is, I'd just love to get everyone's thoughts on the significance of these notes given their timing. Because from my perspective, they just seem too late on the timeline to impact how the FBI actually conducted their investigation prior to February.
All right, let me respond to that. I mean, those notes are interesting, based upon their content, based upon the time frame, based upon the people involved. This is 2 months after Trump has taken office. This is, in and remember, he wasn't supposed to win. Much of what they had been doing would never see the light of day if, he hadn't won. So I think what you have going on in mid-March is a Department of Justice that in some measure, especially led by some of the transition people from the Trump campaign, doesn't know entirely what the FBI has been up to for 9 months. And because, for example, an FBI counterintelligence investigation is not typically overseen by a prosecutor because it's not a criminal case. It's not a criminal investigation. The FBI tends to keep those to themselves. They have to come to the Department of Justice to get certain things, but the day-to-day evolution of a counterintelligence investigation stays within the confines of the FBI. So what I see the timing and the roster of people involved, notably Scott Schools, who, if you don't know, I'll get to him in a minute. This is hey guys, what have you all been up to for the last month that you need to tell us about? Now, this is also 2 weeks before Jim Comey stands up in Congress and says, the FBI is investigating the campaign of Donald Trump for, counterintelligence and criminal reasons and connections to the Russian government. So all of this sort of, swirling controversy that's below the surface, but maybe about to come out into public is taking place. And oh, by the way, Sussman had walked into the CIA just a few weeks before with the same Alpha Bank story. And it's like, okay, FBI, what have you guys been up to, what do you know, and what do you suspect, so that everybody in the room knows. And the fact that it is led by Andy McCabe, the number 2 guy in the FBI, pretty much tells you all you need to know about, how consequential that meeting was. Now, those notes specifically about what Sussman said 9 months earlier in a sit down with Baker about whether he had a client or didn't have a client, that strikes me as too cute by half. That strikes me as somebody has game planned that out in advance and decided, we need a little cover here. And that was a talking point that the FBI brought into that meeting. And was dutifully noted and written down by a couple of DOJ participants. Now, Scott Schools is, at that time, was the senior most civil service employee, in other words, career employee of the Department of Justice. He had taken the place of a legendary guy named David Margolis, who had died, I think, in 2016. Margolis had been with the department for over 40 years, 45 years. And Schools took his place. Schools was an assistant deputy attorney general, meaning he was one of the attorney general's 12 hand-picked main assistants. The deputy attorney general, the number 2 person, who at that time, I guess that was Dana Boente because it was before Rod Rosenstein was confirmed in April, and Jeff Sessions was the attorney general. And Dana Boente is in this meeting. So the deputy attorney general is in the meeting. And, the deputy attorney general is in the meeting because the attorney general had already recused himself. So Sessions couldn't be there. And so you, in effect, have the acting attorney general in the meeting, because this is before Rosenstein gets confirmed, as well as several of his top assistants. So this is not an operational meeting. These people, function above the operational level. This isn't Crossfire Hurricane Team, tell us what you know. This is, what has the FBI been doing? What does DOJ know about it? And what are we going to do next?
It's pretty interesting, Ship. I think you had some good points there. I mean, as it relates to the March meeting, as the original question kind of got into, and as Ship kind of covered there, I mean, it's really unusual to me, and the amount of emphasis that the Sussman team put on that March meeting is really unusual, because there's just no way it can be relevant to a conversation that was had 6 or 7 months earlier, when Sussman took the allegations to the FBI. And obviously, I mean, the fact that Sussman lied is not in dispute. We have the text message. The record's compelling that Sussman did lie. So, the defense team makes the point of, well, how could McKay have known unless there was, notes taken contemporaneously with that meeting way back in September that noted this client. So the Sussman team is saying, well, there's got to be some missing evidence here from that original meeting that clued McCabe into the fact that Sussman was there on behalf of clients. And there's just too many other variables out there. And this investigation had been run to ground by then, by a couple months at least. And the FBI totally debunked these allegations. So I can't really make sense of the strategy of even going into this meeting, because, Sussman did lie, and it was material. And it was material because the FBI hired 2 private companies to investigate these claims. They spent, however much money they had to spend, and they fully investigated these claims. And then when it was done, weeks later, McCabe somehow knew that Sussman was there on behalf of clients, or it's totally a throwaway line. I mean, if a lawyer comes and brings information to the FBI, obviously Sussman didn't gather it. So just making the inference that Sussman was there on behalf of clients seems like a totally, justifiable throwaway line of, oh, okay, well, brought this information on behalf of clients. Like you'd have to get McCabe on the stand, kind of testifying about that, which would be a really interesting cross-examination by Durham, I have to imagine. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts, or Ship, if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, well, the problem, though, with even putting McCabe on the stand is the question is, I mean, you draw, unless Sussman really wants to hear or unless Durham really wants to hear the answer and knows what the answer is, presumably, the objection would be hearsay. I mean, McCabe heard it from somebody. Who was that person? And then who did that person? So you'd have to get back to the point where somebody talked to Sussman, and Sussman said, "I'm here for a client," but the only person Sussman talked to was Baker. So who introduced into the stream of the conversation that Sussman was there for a client? It has to be Baker. If it's not Baker, then it's only hearsay from somebody who wasn't there with Sussman.
I kind of made this point earlier, but I mean, the only other nexus that we have that we know about McCabe is this former CHS that's noted in footnotes 223 and 461 of the I.G. Horowitz report, where it references this former CHS who brought a list of Trump associates, and this list has been subject of a few stories now where, Joffe and people connected to him compiled a whole bunch of email addresses and data from public and non-public databases. And they took that and they brought it to the FBI. And then McCabe, in mid to late September, shuts down this former CHS. He doesn't want anybody speaking to him, doesn't want any more information. Now, this list of Trump associates appears to really closely mirror the people that Crossfire Hurricane is focused on. So it's Carter Page, it's Manafort, it's Papadopoulos, it's General Flynn, and a couple others that were the focus of investigation at the time. So I don't know if it so closely tracks Crossfire Hurricane, McCabe would have to connect that to the Steele dossier that he was getting, and also depending on the content of that list of Trump associates, he would seemingly have to connect it to what Michael Sussman brought him just in that same time frame, right? Because Sussman came on September 19th, I believe, and then we don't have a specific date on when McCabe shut this former CHS down, but it has to be within a couple of days of this meeting. So I don't know if that's the impetus for him to shut down the former CHS, is the realization or the connection of the two. But that's another potential avenue, and there's 100 other avenues of how McCabe would come to that information, or maybe he has no information whatsoever. So I don't know, not to belabor the point, but
to add to that, I think we have a decent idea of what Durham knows just based on the indictment by itself. Paragraph 41A, Sussman advised the former employee of the CIA that he represented a client. That was in January 31, 2017. So I think we, at least that, how I read it, we have an idea of what Durham thinks what happened. Sussman went to the CIA. He was more forward about representing a client, I'm presuming because it was after the election. And at that point, he probably was representing Joffrey alone. But at that point, I think I guess that's what I think is the answer to the question.
There's a possibility that McCabe is more involved in all of this than meets the eye because of his kind of crazy decision on the surface to shut, assuming it's Joffe, to shut Joffe down, cut him off from Crossfire Hurricane. When Joffe is producing evidence that Crossfire Hurricane could use. But for some reason, McCabe doesn't want Joffe connected to that investigation. So given the fact that McCabe doesn't want Joffe connected to the investigation, Joffe has stuff he wants to give to the investigation. What do? You find an intermediary. it could be this whole thing points to McCabe manipulating who's the Crossfire Hurricane people hear from. I don't know, but that's given the way that guy works, it's possible.
It seems to me that it's absolutely unbelievable that you have all these bigwigs from FBI, DOJ sitting down, hashing all this stuff out. And I think Chip's point that maybe this entire affair was just a CYA attempt, kind of like Susan Rice writing the by the book email on her last day in office. I think it was Susan Rice. But they're talking about Crown Materials, which was obviously Christopher Steele, and they're talking about Sussman. So it's all on the table. It's like, how are you guys, who are the elite investigators in the country, not putting together that you're getting fed a line of BS from several directions, and it's all pointing in the same direction? That's too good to be true. That's just, no one apparently said, hey, wait a minute, we're being played here. How is that possible?
Well, and you raise a very interesting point that we don't have the answer to, and that is this a meeting that was prompted by the FBI to get right with justice? In order, got Trump people coming into justice. Let's get our cards out on the table and explain ourselves so that we don't look like a bunch of partisans who were out to take Trump down, but we were actually acting in good faith, pursuing leads that we had a good faith belief in. Or was this justice calling the FBI on the carpet saying, what in the fuck have you guys been doing? We don't know. We don't know who, at least I can't tell, who was responsible for that group of people to all be in a room together on that day to go over this.
Somebody on Twitter today reposted the struck page email exchange from the day before, which was a Sunday. They came to work early Sunday morning and worked all day, kind of packaging what they were going to tell justice. And the triggering event was Trump's tweet about his wires at Trump Tower being hacked by Obama. That's what justice wanted to hear an answer to.
And for what it's worth, at least Exhibit C to Sussman's briefing, it's the attachment for the Outlook meeting for this, and it was organized, it does look like, by Tashnaya Guhar from the DOJ. So maybe it was the DOJ, telling the FBI to come and answer for what it's been doing.
Now that would make sense to me, because you've got the acting attorney general sitting in the room, and the FBI is the one doing the briefing. And the only person missing is Comey. And they all work for the acting attorney general. Comey doesn't. The FBI directors don't think so, but they do. So between the two sides, who could summon who? Andy McCabe isn't going to summon the acting attorney general to listen to him. The acting attorney general is going to summon somebody from the FBI of senior status to come explain to me what you know and what you've been doing. And this is, frankly, this is what Sessions should have done before he recused himself. Sessions should have satisfied himself that there was a bona fide criminal or counterintelligence investigation underway and that his recusal was necessary.
That's my question, though. Was this a call you on the carpet, tell us what you've been doing meeting, or was this we've all got our hands dirty here, because how many FISA warrants had been passed by in this interim? So the DOJ is not operating completely in the dark here. They're part of this too, and that was Steele stuff. So it's all part and parcel. So exactly what kind of meeting was this, and was it maybe, okay, let's get on the same page and go by the party line, as opposed to let's do a fact finding.
Yeah, DOJ's involvement in that would have been less meaningful. I mean, you have operational people in the OI, Office of Intelligence Review, who review the applications being made by the FBI, but once they pass them, once that office says, okay, you're good to go, the approvals after that are just pro forma, and the approvals are simply meant to signify nothing other than this was done through the ordinary channels. I've tried to make people understand this. There's 1,800 FISAs done in 2016. Anybody who thinks the Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General or FBI Director read all 1,800, it's a fantasy. These things are hundreds of pages long. They wouldn't do anything else every day, 365 days a year, other than read FISAs. They don't. They rely upon the structure that's in place to create these things, to vet these things, and to approve these things. And when all of those boxes are checked, it goes up the chain. But it does not get read, more than 2 or 3 levels above where the work's done.
Well, they'd immunized Danchenko at this point, right? So, I mean, there has to be. We're talking about investigating the president of the United States here at this point.
Okay.
So.
And let me stop you. I've heard references to make the sweetheart deal Danchenko got. Danchenko, that's not what a proper agreement is. It's not what a queen for a day is. It's not what use immunity is. It's not a deal. He could be prosecuted for everything coming out of that meeting that he could be prosecuted for going into that meeting. The only thing a proper agreement means is that no FBI agent will get on a witness stand and testify to a jury about what it was Danchenko said in that room that day. In other words, Danchenko can speak freely because his own words are not going to be used against him in a courtroom. That's what you want when you've got a witness in for a proffer. You want them to speak freely. So the promise is Agent, Scully will not get in front of a jury and say, on January 24th, I interviewed Mr. Danchenko and he said the following. That's what a proper agreement excludes. It does not exclude prosecution for those crimes. The government just has to obtain its evidence from sources other than the defendant's own statements. So I've heard David Laufman gave him a great deal enough times to kind of make me want to pull my hair out over that issue.
Hey, Hans, I see your speaker now. I don't know if you want to jump in with anything.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, no, of course I agree with Ship in terms of, the procedures and the rules and all that, but you're talking about this Russian guy who one day in January of 2017 has the cops show up at his door and they want to talk to him and he panics. And everything that happens from there, he's kind of under the control of whoever is controlling him. And I don't want to name names right now, but if he's then told by whoever that is, oh, don't worry, Igor, you got Queen of the Day. You can do whatever you want. Just trust us. Just do whatever we say. Things can kind of go downhill pretty fast from there. And I kind of suspect that's what happened because he had no incentive of his own volition to lie unless he was told, it's all good. You can go ahead. You can lie. It's fine.
Honestly, I've talked to, over the years, I have had some limited involvement in Russian organized crime and Eastern European organized crime operations to understand that it is in many ways something of a cultural imperative to lie your way out of every situation you find yourself in. It's like always the first reaction. Deny the obvious, blame somebody else. It happens all the time in a variety of circumstances. Danchenko reacted in exactly the way I would have expected a Danchenko to react because I'd seen it so many times before.
Yeah, I think that's right, but let's not discount the 57-page EC on Danchenko's first interview, which is really the only evidence we have. That's the only hard kind of data we have. And what does it say? Well, one of the things that jumped out at me when I first read that is that Danchenko's lawyer, who shall remain nameless, kept jumping in whenever Danchenko said anything that the lawyer wasn't quite happy with, and he was like, Igor, remember this was. So it was clearly rehearsed what they had done. Now, that, of course, raises the question of whether what was rehearsed because it was true or because it was not true. And I don't know whether the lawyer thought it was true or whether it wasn't true. But at a minimum, it was rehearsed. So, I don't disagree with Ship at all. But if he's going to lie his way out of a situation, he would have lied at least twice. He would have lied to the lawyer ahead of time. And then he would have lied again in front of the FBI with the lawyer there when the lawyer prompted him.
I think I'm right on board with you, Hans. I mean, it doesn't make sense for Danchenko to tell the truth about pieces of it and then lie about other pieces. And I'm thinking specifically about Chuck Dolan. So, he tells the FBI that certain pieces were embellished. And, certain pieces, came from Danchenko, but then still embellished, according to Danchenko. But then in later interviews, he obscures completely and lies completely about his relationship with Chuck Dolan and sourcing from the dossier coming from Chuck Dolan. So it is really unusual to bear down on that so many times.
Not really. I mean, it is not unusual at all to get admissions to things the witness thinks you already know and to deny things the witness thinks you don't know. If nobody had ever mentioned Chuck Dolan to him before, I mean, by the time he's interviewed, the Steele reports are already in the media. He can't really deny what's in them. And he can't deny that he is, subsource one or prime subsource, whatever the designation was, primary subsource one. He can't deny any of those things because they've already been published. He's already been identified. The FBI knows who he is. The FBI knows he was working with Steele. So he can admit the things where he has to. The imperative is to admit the things that the FBI knows. And because he's admitting that, to assume the FBI will accept at face value his denial about things that he doesn't know they know about until he's cornered and confronted, and then you get a grudging admission. This goes on. I mean, I did the same thing in drug cases for years. Like, I mean, dealing with lower level drug traffickers is like, it just makes you want to pull your hair out because they only begin telling you what they think you already know, and they deny everything else when they know everything else.
There's the issue of I've just opened it up here, the 57-page EC, the one that Lindsey Graham released on July 17th, 2020, the only good thing that Lindsey Graham has ever done. And in it, I mean, if you just search for attorney, right, there's a bunch of instances where the FBI kind of puts into the interview, at this point, the attorney stopped and said something, and it happens again and again. And each time it's to prompt Danchenko to basically say something that they had prepared. Just pulling out one here that I remember that kind of jumped out at me at the time was, remember Danchenko was suspected of being a Russian spy, and he definitely knew people from the Russian embassy who were with Intel and so on. So he was asked about that by the FBI, and he basically said, no, I know nothing. And then the attorney jumps in and says, I just want to say he doesn't know anything to his knowledge, just to make that clear. So on that point, I mean, and that doesn't in any way deflect from what Chip just said, but on that point, it's very clear that they had discussed this issue that Danchenko had, in fact, had these contacts. and they kind of agreed to just say to my knowledge or to his knowledge or whatever in the interview, which then Danchenko must have forgotten to say, and then the attorney jumps in and says it. So again, that doesn't deflect from what Chip is saying, but I'm still very perplexed by the fact that they had obviously prepared this, and they had obviously talked through what was going to be said, and the attorney had to jump in on many, many occasions throughout this interview, and yet some of these things are extremely dismissive of Steele. It's like basically the whole thing is bullshit. No, none of this ever happened. None of this was just gossip. This is just rumors, whatever. But on a few other points, Dolan is one that you just mentioned. There's a couple of others. Millian is another one. Millian is a huge one. He stuck to his guns, even though it was a total lie. And I can't help but think that someone egged him on there. That wasn't just him.
On that point, Hans, I went back and read the EC after that because Richard Scott was in that meeting, this March 2017 meeting, and he was also in the Danchenko interviews. So I went back and read his Senate Judiciary testimony, and he was basically just like, I don't remember the attorney Shamel basically interrupting at all or having to do that. And I'm like, no, he definitely did it a decent amount of time. So I went back in the EC, and you're exactly right, but. In Scott's testimony, he says, I don't remember the lawyer really having to interrupt at all, that Danchenko was just basically going freely. I'm like, nah.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting that it was even in that March 2017 meeting, which I guess we don't have all the notes, but it'd be interesting if they actually talked about the Crown's source, basically.
That 54-page EC is an embarrassment. I mean, that was a 3-day interview. Now, I don't know if it was 8 hours each day. I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure it was a fraction of each day. But for that to produce a 54-page double-spaced EC, which had it been condensed into the form of a 302, might have been 8 or 10 pages, maybe, is just ridiculous. And it shows that it's a work product of an analyst with a preconceived set of notions about what the evidence is, Brian Auten. And it's a work product that advanced his point of view. It's a piece of garbage. An agent would have never written something like that, and the fact that it was left to an analyst to do it, I've been told, is not unusual on the intelligence side. It would never happen on the criminal side, because that would have been a testimonial document. That, had there been a need at some point for an agent to get on the stand and testify, you would have needed a 302 form memorializing the content of the interview. But because it was an intelligence debriefing, not part of a criminal investigation, it was memorialized in a perfunctory fashion with an EC by an analyst. It has limited utility. From that point forward, its utility is only for the benefit of the people who choose to read it. Brian Auten's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and that EC reflects it. And I've also had somebody with a lot of experience on the intelligence side tell me that interview was not for the purposes of trying to unearth and discover everything that Danchenko might have known. That interview was for the purpose of finding out from Danchenko if he had actually sourced to Steele the things that Steele claimed Danchenko sourced to him. Because if he had, whether it was true or not, setting aside for a moment the truth or falsity of Danchenko's information, if Steele had accurately reported what Danchenko told him, that made Steele reliable. He may have been reporting false information, but Steele didn't know that. And Steele accurately reported what Danchenko told him if Danchenko would confirm it. That would mean they wouldn't have to pull back the FISA application, which relied upon Steele. If Danchenko would have said, I never told Steele any of that, he made it all up, then they would have had to pull back the FISA application.
Except that's what the EC says. Danchenko says over and over again, rumor, bar talk, Steele has things in here that I didn't say. That's in there many times.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean,
but hold on, wait. But the distinction is, which parts of that are actually in the affidavit? Are the stuff that he identifies in rumor and bar talk in the affidavit or not in the affidavit? You have to say, okay, what did you actually tell him? And then are those parts relied upon by the government in the affidavit? So, for example, the sex tape is not in the affidavit.
What's in the affidavit, actually in the FISA application, is verbatim from Memo 95, which talks about a Trump-Russia conspiracy that's gone on for years. And then goes on to talk about Carter Page and his meeting in Moscow. Those are all sourced to Millian on a that Danchenko describes as one telephone call lasting about 10 minutes with somebody who didn't say who he was.
Yeah, but he admitted that he gave that information to Steele, and Steele reported it accurately.
So
that exercise was part of a source validation, with the source being validated being Steele, not Danchenko.
So the point is, the FBI doesn't care if Danchenko's reliable or if he's a liar. They care if Steele is lying to the FBI. That's what they're there to find out. And down the line, they could care less, or not so much they could care less. They don't want to know.
They won't use Danchenko again. They won't use Danchenko for anything. They couldn't use Danchenko in February of 2017 because he had already been deemed a likely Russian agent in 2009.
But they'll continue to steal. That point being, it doesn't matter. They won't use Danchenko, but they weren't using Danchenko. They were using Steele, who was using Danchenko, and they were fine with that.
Well, but they deactivated Steele too after his contact with law enforcement, or after his contact with the media, which he didn't disclose, contrary to his instructions. He was deactivated as well. However, the affidavit went in before that. The affidavit went in when he was still deemed reliable. So now the question is, okay, we've deactivated him because of his media contacts. Do we also have to pull the affidavit? That's what interviewing Danchenko was about. Do we have to pull Steele's the affidavit that relies on Steele's information?
Ship, they didn't ask him the question of what he told Steele and when. Because if you read Danchenko's EC, he describes one subsource connected to Trump, Millian, that he identified as the anonymous caller. He had one telephone call lasting 10 minutes. But Steele has at least 4 different memos that identify that source, as that particular source, as the origin of what's in each of those 4 memos. And those took place over about a 1-month period of time. So Danchenko's story doesn't match Steele's dossier, period. And they didn't ask Danchenko, well, did you lie to Steele and tell him you talked to the guy 4 times? They didn't ask him that.
I lost you there for a second.
What's that?
Oh, for some reason my headphones cut out. I couldn't hear anything. Now, I understand the point. I understand that Steele's memos are inconsistent with Danchenko's explanation. But it's a narrower question than that. The question is the affidavit, which was submitted with information from Steele, is that specific information contradicted by Danchenko's interview? Are those lies by Steele, or did Danchenko tell him that, whether accurate or not?
Well, they didn't ask the question. They literally did not ask that question.
No, but that's the purpose of the exercise. They're going through those details. They're not telling Danchenko that.
No,
You know,
no.
that's
My
they're
point
keeping
is
score. They're keeping score on a separate piece of paper about what we need to validate.
they didn't ask Danchenko what he told Steele. Tell us word for word what you told Steele and when you told it. They didn't ask him that question.
Yeah, and I think that's the $64,000 question here, or whatever the word is. That's exactly the point. I mean, I've just been looking through it as we were talking here, and you're both right. I mean, on the one hand, Danchenko kind of disavows Steele and says, "Oh, that was just rumors and whatever." But Ship is also right, because nothing here proves that Steele lied to the FBI explicitly either. So it's sort of it's really kind of very smart what they did here. Looking at the EC in view of what Chip just said, like their whole framework was, let's just get this guy to tell us stuff which isn't going to implicate Steele. If you read it that way, it's pretty well done, and I think Chip has got a really good point there. I think the biggest exemplar of what King just said is exactly the point about Millian. They ask him about Millian and meeting Millian and all that kind of stuff, and it's basically all a big lie. But never once do they ask him, what did you tell Steele about Millian? Nothing whatsoever on that. And that kind of is a huge giveaway.
I mean, another point that we haven't talked about much recently is the fact that Bill Priestap went to London to get additional information on Christopher Steele, and I think that was November 2016. And they said he's known to embellish a little bit, and you can't necessarily trust everything he's saying, and things of that nature. And they basically provided it on the condition that they didn't put it in official reports. But when you're going to the FISA court and you're spying on American citizens, you have a duty to provide all information that you're in possession of. So it's kind of to the point that was made earlier. They didn't want to find out things that were against their objectives. I mean, there's a mountain of evidence saying don't go any farther, and they continue to ignore it so that they could continue the investigation.
Yeah, the decision by Priestap to hold back that information when he's got a duty of candor, because it was provided to him under a rule of non-disclosure, that puts him in a tough position. But I think his decision was the wrong one, and I suspect there are a lot of FBI personnel who would agree that that was not the right decision, that the objective for presenting Steele accurately overrode the concern about confidentiality.
And you guys have anything else? I might take a couple more questions.
There's also the Wall Street Journal piece from today, which was very interesting. I mean, I think we all had slightly different takes. I think we all agreed. These just for everyone who hasn't seen that Wall Street Journal piece today, they basically talked to Alexei Gubarev, the guy down in Cyprus, about what happened with him and Dolan and Danchenko and whatever. And the bottom line is that he thinks he was shafted by Danchenko, and that was kind of it. And then they kind of tell the whole story about Galkina and Gubarev and Danchenko. It's kind of fairly interesting, but it's also kind of devoid of a couple of things. One of the big ones is no Sergei whatsoever. I mean, how can you talk about any of this stuff, the Steele dossier, without Sergei, who is like the source for its main accusations? The other thing, and this is the one I wanted to focus on here, is strangely, the entire piece, I mean, I read it 2 or 3 times just because it just seems so odd. And I'm always suspicious of anything Wall Street Journal because of Mark Merrimont, the guy who set up poor Sergei Millian on the very day that Danchenko had to go into the FBI for his interview. as if to give the FBI sort of cover for what they were going to do. And then it turns out that Mark Marmont is buddies with Peter Fritsch and Glenn Simpson, and they go back decades. So, every time I see Wall Street Journal, I'm like, okay. Anyway, bottom line is the entire piece, you can read it again and again and again, makes Steele look like the total victim here. Oh, poor Steele, he just heard these stories and, that's it, poor Steele. And it's totally incredulous. Because let's face it, you're Steele, you're supposedly this old Russia hand at MI6, and you know all this stuff, and you've been to Moscow, and you've represented the UK government, and you've been a spy and all these things. And then some analyst out of Washington, D.C. comes along and tells you all these stories, and he's got no access to anyone or anything. You're not going to believe this guy. I mean, to Steele, Danchenko was always just an alibi. He was just a cover. He was just a CYA guy. So, I thought the Wall Street Journal let Steele off, and I think that was pretty much on purpose.
That was my take as well, that it seemed like a whitewash of definitely Steele and then fusion by, inference. And even Danchenko came away looking not, entirely clean, but he would have looked a lot worse if the story was told in context and everything going on. And they really threw Galkina under the bus. And that if you just read that story without knowing anything else, you'd probably think there was this drunken, crazy Russian woman that was spinning all these stories, and she was the nexus of all this. And that is, I'm sure maybe there's some truth to that, but that is just the very smallest part of the story.
I have a question. What is your guys' sense about Danchenko? He's a Russian living in America, and he's indicted. How scared is he really? If you could look into his mind, his thinking, is this guy who's someone who was afraid for his position back in January 2017? Or was he pretty full of himself back then? He thought nothing could go wrong. Is he afraid of Steele and other people? Just a question.
My take is that it depends on the level of hubris, and his hubris tends to kind of sway and up and down. And certainly back then it seemed to be pretty high. I mean, you look at these. You look at what came out today in the Wall Street Journal and compare that as well with some of the earlier stuff on Dolan. He was riding a wave there, He was invited to all these high-level conferences. He was invited to Moscow and, hanging around these high-level people and so on. And he was probably told, one of the things that, jumped out is Fiona Hill, our old friend Fiona Hill. When he needed to get in touch with someone in D.C. who could, sort of a power broker type, who did he call? Who did Danchenko call? He called Fiona Hill. And I think, that was a source of a lot of both hubris and perhaps arrogance and, cockiness, confidence, whatever. And he kind of just rode that wave. I think when the FBI arrived...
Hans, he put Gubarev in the freaking dossier, and then he asked for money from him. That's how
Dude, he sent him an invoice for $1,500.
That's how invincible he thought he was.
No, very much so. This is a really good point. It was like $1,154 or whatever, with a sort of I really like you, and here's my invoice. It's cheap as well, but anyway, completely agree. I think when the FBI arrived, he panicked, but then he had, my totally personal assumption, and I have no evidence to prove it or whatever, it's just a guess, is that the first person he called when the FBI arrived wasn't Steele, even though he did call Steele at some point, and Steele then called Simpson. We kind of know that from the Bruce Orr texts, but I think he called Dolan. Dolan was his sort of DC fixer kind of guy. It's like, Dolan, what do I do? And that's an untold story as to kind of what happened there. The whole, between January 12th, 13th, whenever the FBI showed up at Danchenko's doorstep, and 24th, when he was interviewed 12 days later, lots of stuff happened in that time, and one day we'll find out what happened. So I think he was probably on a low then. Oh shit, but then he was being told by the lawyer and by all these other people, no, we got you here, you're fine. The hubris went way up again. I mean, we all know his Twitter, right? Over the past few years, it was as if he didn't have a care in the world. It's astounding reading this guy's Twitter. And then sometime recently, right, it sort of dropped down through the floor and he stopped tweeting, probably because someone told him, no, you're in real trouble here. You gotta not do this. So anyway, I think the answer is it just goes up and down with him.
You see in today's story that Gubarev said that Dolan told him that Danchenko likely had compiled the dossier for Steele. Does that just not make you just wonder what's going on?
I did see that. It's pretty interesting.
No, it did say that, and it does, because it suggests that Dolan knew more than he let on. Because we're talking right back in January of 2017. So if Dolan was just this innocent guy who was just like there, how the hell would he know all these things, right?
I noticed that there's not a date attached to that claim. So maybe it wasn't said in an email. Maybe it was just said in person. But I'd like to know what time frame, like that Dolan admitted that, like, oh, this guy no one's heard of, Danchenko, is responsible.
Yeah, no, I think it is January of 2017 from context. I mean, you're right. The Wall Street Journal could have done a much, much better job. And again, that's why I'm very suspicious of what they're really up to. They could have done a much better job in detailing what exactly they communicated with Gubarev. I don't have access to Gubarev. I can't email him or pick up the phone. I would love to. I would pick this guy's brains like no one's business. They had access. And they didn't use it because all they came out with was these kinds of platitudes, and there was no real juice to it. As you say, we don't even know the date. From context, it looks like Gubarev fired Dolan on December 12th, 2016. Soon after, Gubarev appears in a dossier report and is totally smeared. And then within a month, roughly, and this is again from context, Gubarev rehires Dolan to fix the problems caused by the dossier caused by Dolan. Now, Dolan will say, no, those weren't caused by me. Those were caused by Danchenko. But it's just such a weird arrangement. But yeah, no, in terms of the time frame, I'm pretty sure we're talking January of 2017 when he was rehired and when he said those things. But it's just very, very strange. And I really wish, and if they're listening, guys, Wall Street Journal, right? If you have access, you gotta go and get the goods. And, they didn't do that.
Well, think about it. If that context is January 2017, and Gubarev has this new information that Dolan said, oh, this guy Igor wrote all this bad stuff about you. Why so Gubarev just sits on that for years and doesn't tell anybody? Or does someone come knocking on his door and says, we'd like to ask you a few questions? Like, that doesn't just sit in his head for 5 years, right?
That's a good question. I mean, if he knew that Danchenko was the source of these malicious allegations against him, why didn't he take action?
Well, that's why I'm skeptical of that, because why didn't he just go and if he knew it was Danchenko, why didn't he just go and sue Steele and Danchenko instead of BuzzFeed?
There you go.
Perfect. And he spent millions of dollars on that. And I mean, we've all rifled through those court filings, every last bit of them, and there was no mention of any of that. So it's all very, very strange.
Also, can I butt in? Like, remember in 2020, I think it was July, Steele's deposition in the UK. The attorneys for the other side mentioned text messages, undated but likely December 2016, where David Kramer of the McCain Institute, the lawyer, is reading out texts from Kramer to Steele, where Kramer is saying, "Oh, my guy Alan Cullison of the Wall Street Journal, who wrote today's story about Dolan, was Alan Cullison was running down the Michael Cohen stuff in Prague. something about Israeli passports, and then there was Cyprus. They mentioned Cyprus. He says, it's nothing like Moscow. I mean, going into Moscow, one thing, but going to Cyprus is going to the lion's den. And this is context. Alan Collison doesn't want to go to Cyprus, if I'm reading the deposition correctly. And then if you guys were on Twitter today, we talked about Cyprus a little bit. So,
no, you're right. It is very strange. And the whole thing about Gubarev is so strange because he spent millions of dollars and then he didn't follow through for some reason. And so his explanation in today's Wall Street Journal is like, oh, it's bad karma. I mean, bullshit. You don't spend $5 million or whatever on legal fees and then say, oh, it's bad karma. I'm just not going to, deal with it. Especially the Dolan stuff. I was just looking back at, my own kind of analysis back on Twitter back when the whole Dolan thing came out. And I was like, oh my God, this is a massive lawsuit, not only against Dolan, but his firm. Because now he's got this Dolan guy basically having two masters at the same time. Wow, fantastic for Gubarev. And he never sued. And now he says he doesn't want to sue because it's bad karma. It doesn't make sense. It just, I don't know what's up with that. But, at the time when he was suing Steele in London, they made a lot of mistakes, those lawyers. And there was a lot of stuff they left on the cutting room floor and didn't utilize. And I never understood that. Now, maybe he just employs bad people. Let's face it. I mean, he employed Danchenko and Galkina and Dolan. So maybe that's the problem there. But, even now, it's still within the statute of limitations. That guy has a massive case against, as I said, not only Dolan, but Dolan's company.
And one of the things from the Wall Street Journal article, they asked Dolan for comment, and he said, I have no comment while Danchenko is facing legal jeopardy, which I found was a kind of interesting way of, I don't know, you could read it both ways, but, and I also think that it's probably bullshit that I think he was talking to them off the record, because how else are you getting all these details? It wasn't Danchenko talking, it wasn't Galkina talking. So I think Dolan gave them a lot of this information off the record, and it seemed very self-serving. It seemed he was the only one that came out of this smelling even remotely, pleasant.
Yeah. Hey, Cody, did you have something?
I was going to mention something, but it was probably not. I can't recall what it was.
All righty. Do you guys have anything else? I might take a couple questions here. All righty.
By the way, still no ruling in the record on the privilege.
That's weird. Less than a week to go to trial now. It seems, I don't know, maybe he gave him a heads up privately or something. It seems like, I don't know. Seems like the judge would rule on that, but it's only 38 emails. Like, you could read those in half an hour and then, type your memo up and you're done. Hey, General Logos, what's going on, man?
Hey, thanks for having me. I just want to say thanks for having these chats. I really enjoy them. They're very informative. I have two questions. First one, it may already be known amongst everyone, but I'm kind of fairly new to all of this. What exactly is the scope for the investigation? Like how broad, how far is he able to go? And the second question is, what is everyone, the hosts and some of the speakers there, what is everyone's kind of prediction for what ultimately is going to happen? It just seems that, if you go back into Clinton's history, all the way back to, Filegate, everything else, it just seems like so many are untouchable, and they may get a couple guys on some charges, may see some jail time. But ultimately, it just seems, if you think about the past, that most of it just really won't even be covered in the media. So I'm just kind of curious what everyone's predictions are, just for I don't know, just if anyone has any insight.
Yeah, so as to your first question, as to the scope of John Durham's authorized to look at basically any campaigns that were waged against anyone related to 2016. So any campaigns that were active. I forget the exact verbiage of the memo appointing him to special counsel, but he's basically got authorization to look at any type of investigations connected to 2016, to include Robert Mueller. Obviously, the Hillary Clinton campaign has some involvement there as well. Yeah, so it's a pretty broad scope. I'd have to pull up the letter to take a look at that. If anybody else wants to jump in on that or offer predictions, go ahead.
Yeah, on the scope, you're absolutely right. I mean, Barr, for whatever reason, he made the scope really, really wide when he appointed Durham, which is great. But let's look at the practicalities of it. Durham can't really make use of that scope because he runs a tiny operation with a tiny budget, and I think this is an ongoing problem where he just doesn't have. He's got like a handful of people, and Mueller had like 50 people, and it shows. When you have to dig through these tons and tons of documents and find all these, like, look at what happened yesterday, right? Sussman's people found this one line of handwritten notes, which they think helped them, and it probably helps them in some small way. The documents they release kind of help us more than them in terms of the wider narrative, but it's just you just need the resources, and Durham doesn't have them. So even though his scope is ginormous, it's anything that arises from the investigation. That's literally what it says. It could be anything whatsoever. Is in practical terms limited by what the DOJ will allow, and we're still waiting for his costs for the past 6 months, which haven't been published. They should be published any day now, so we'll see that soon. But every time they have been published, they've been like 10% or 5%, just a tiny amount of what Mueller spent in the same period. In terms of predictions, my prediction remains no public people, just private people. And among the private people, he's going to go as high as Elias, maybe, if we're lucky, and that's it.
Anybody else have predictions? Nobody wants to follow Hans. I'll throw it out there. I'm much more aggressive in my predictions. I mean, I think multiple members of the Clinton campaign will probably be indicted. Rodney Joffe's probably got some concerns tonight. I don't know about Manos. I can't make heads or tails of whether he's a target or just a witness. Based on the information we have, he was a witness as of last summer, but we don't know how that might have evolved. I think there's going to be some nexus to DARPA, which is going to get really interesting because that's the Department of Defense. So I don't know where that's going to lead. There's going to be 100 offshoots of this investigation. I mean, there's indications Measurement Systems, which is a company tied to Rodney Joffe and Raymond Salino. I mean, they were collecting data and selling it to the government, but they also have a registration in Panama. So what are they really doing? That could be kind of an offshoot investigation, I could see. There's a whole bunch of characters around that whole cell and all these different companies. I don't know. I used to think there might be a few people from like the FBI and Obama administration or even the State Department that might get indicted. I have kind of lost confidence in that, but I still point out, John Ratcliffe is out there really regularly with information that he has seen. He doesn't seem to be hyping it. I mean, he seems to be really confident in what he's saying. I mean, he's seen some classified documents that give him some reason to believe there's going to be many more indictments. I can't really dispute that. He has information that I don't have. So I don't know. I would say no. I would probably agree with Hans at this point. It'd probably be just private individuals. But John Ratcliffe has seen more information than both of us, and he's saying government officials will be indicted. So I don't know.
I'm going to add my prediction is that, like, I remember when the whole, like, Jaffe thing came out and the Sussman indictment, we were like, holy shit, like, all this shit was happening. We had no idea. I feel like there's going to be something like that happens, like, maybe on the government side or something that Durham dug into, and then something, like, just comes out of nowhere that we have no idea about, and then something crazy happens. That's just going to be my optimistic prediction, but that's just coming out of nowhere because I was caught so off guard by the whole Jaffe thing that I feel like something like that could happen again. I see no reason why that couldn't happen again.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Hans. And we still have so many questions around Stefan Halper. I mean, is that going to be a completely other cell? Like, this Alpha Bank stuff was thought to be a really small piece of Russiagate. And then we find out about Rodney Jaffe and Manos and David, and they're under federal contracts with DARPA, and there's like a massive number of people tied into this cell. Is it going to be something like that with Stefan Halper, or is he going to be found to have some connection to people that we already know about? I don't know. Or is it going to be somebody completely new?
Could be Black Ledger related, could be any of that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Who knows?
Yeah, I think to be a little bit more downbeat, historically the way these things kind of end is you might get somebody like Sussman, maybe a Jaffe, and then as it looks like things are going higher, people start getting pardoned, and a report comes out, and it's just not in anybody's interest for all of these different entities to all of a sudden be at each other's throats with prison on the line. So it just gets shut down. And I think if best case scenario is there's enough evidence that things go high enough that people have to get pardoned, and at least then you can go see, we had them, here's the report, these people are guilty as hell. But is Mark Elias going to be in a jail cell? And certainly higher than that, I think it's just super unlikely.
If Durham had this same, just like a fraction of the resources that Mueller had, I have no doubt all these things plus would be happening. I do think it comes down to resources, and now the resources are being really eaten up by this whole Sussman thing, which should be a slam dunk really. And if that goddamn James Baker just handed over his text message, it could have been a slam dunk right from the get-go. But Durham didn't get that until March. So he had to build his case around this gigantic argument, which we've all been going through. Whereas if Baker had handed over the text message on time, he could have just said, well, there's a text message. That's the lie right there. Boom. We don't have to discuss any of these other things. So, you can all see, with all these filings and a Sunday filing yesterday and so on, that eats up resources. That means that these Durham people are up 18 hours a day working. There aren't too many of them, and it's not good. So for all those reasons, I don't think it's going to go very well. Look at Kleinsmith. That was a resource issue as well. Durham was kind of a bare bones operation back then, and they messed up the Kleinsmith thing. They let the guy go because they didn't understand the situation. They didn't know he lied about other things as well, especially the Russian-based thing, which was gigantic. It was huge. And they didn't even put it in the charging document. They didn't even put it anywhere. And to this day, I don't think it was some strategic decision or whatever, because it would never, ever came up. I just think they never saw it. They never considered it. They weren't reading our Twitter, because I don't blame them. If it's just a couple of people working on this, they're working on other things. So for all those reasons, I don't think we're gonna get all that. That said, if there were resources, or Durham, if you're listening or whatever, one really, really intriguing thing is the connection between Steele and Halper. You guys mentioned Halper, and it's a really good point. we still don't have that connection. We still don't have a contact between those two. I mean, they're both based in the UK and so on, but other than that, it would just be so huge. And it's not just kind of wishful thinking or whatever. Remember, Flynn was not part of this at all. Flynn had nothing to do with this at all, right? They had Manafort, they had been looking at it for a long time. They had Page that they were looking at for a long time. Then Downer comes along and they got Papadopoulos, okay? No Flynn on the radar, nothing. Then suddenly, I think it was, don't quote me, August 12th or August 11th, Steele's report of that day mentions Flynn. Guess what? The very next day, Halper goes to the FBI and mentions Flynn. So you got, within 24 hours, you got Steele and Halper bringing up Flynn out of nowhere. So to me, that's really probably the most intriguing, most kind of not understood issue in all of this. And if Durham had the resources, it'd be very easy to figure this out. But look, can he just send a team over to the UK? Can he do this? Can he do that? He had to employ a firm, just, for listeners, right? He couldn't even get cooperation from anyone in the UK. So he had to employ a UK firm to start working for him, which is so weird. So yeah, I don't think we're going to get much out of it, unfortunately.
In Carter Page's his book Abuse and Power, he mentions how, like, at the end of March 2017, he was ambush interviewed by Soma and another FBI interviewer, and the first question they asked that day was about Michael Flynn, because the previous day the Wall Street Journal had published that Mike Flynn agrees to cooperate in exchange for immunity. And so Carter Page remarks that the FBI agents were very puzzled that when Carter Page said he had never spoken with Flynn ever. So it kind of tracks that there's this hidden connection that we don't yet know about. Don't know what it is. I've never been able to locate it.
All right. Do you guys have anything else? I might take a couple questions and then see where we're at. Hey, Larry, how's it going? Hey, Larry, how's it going?
Hey guys, good. Good conversation again. Good stuff. This is my craft. I've been hooked on it for 5 years, and hopefully something good will start happening next week. Just first question was about what you were talking about there, what Hans said. Does it seem like Halper told Steele, or Steele told Halper, or someone told Steele and Halper coordinate? And did somebody try to keep them from knowing about each other so that even they wouldn't know about each other and they'd be feeding this stuff in? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to the August period, so the 3 investigations had opened on August 10th, officially as part of Crossfire Hurricane. They had it on Page, Manafort, and Papadopoulos. And then, as Hans said, and we don't know the impetus for it. Maybe it was somebody in the Obama administration that still held a grudge against General Flynn. There's some interest, I would have to assume, in General Flynn at that point. And then, for whatever reason, they didn't have enough to open up a case on General Flynn. And then the very next day, they connect with Stefan Halper, who, sure enough, knows all the stuff about General Flynn. And within a couple of days, they're able to open up an official investigation into General Flynn. So I don't know if that answers your questions. I think I forgot the second part of what you had there.
Well, I'm just wondering if somebody was telling them separately, these two, Steele and Halper, and maybe even not wanting Steele to know about Halper. Did Steele know about Halper, or you know what I mean? Was somebody kind of directing a bunch of people who didn't even know about each other? Or?
I think that's a really, really good point. I think those are the two options here. And they're both kind of equally intriguing. So either you had Steele and Halper who knew each other. Again, there's we don't have evidence for that, other than that they both somehow knew to frame Steele at exactly the same time, and they're both living in the UK, and they're both kind of in the same circles. But other than that, we don't know. Or, as you say, and I think that's a really good point, is it that they were both fed by a third party the same information to release at the same point in time? And then you get to who's that third party? You get to the whole point of why the hell did Halper set up this meeting down in Cambridge with Carter Page? I mean, he just suddenly shows up over there. So who told him to do that? So you got this guy Stefan Strage, who we haven't talked about for probably a year or two. You remember he showed up on Maria Bartiromo's show a couple of years back, and it was like
I remember,
huge deal, and all of a sudden it's like he's just gone. So, no, I think that's a fantastic point. We just don't know which one of these two options it is. But, I guess the third option is it's just a total coincidence that these two guys, Halper and Steele, framed Flynn at exactly the same time. So those are the three options, and we just don't know.
Right. Like maybe they thought, they'd get a bite at the same, like they both independently thought that because they knew that Flynn, was around and the Obama admin didn't like him or something.
Yeah, no, of course, but it's just so weird how that would happen within 24 hours, just as the FBI was looking to open an investigation. It's just, so I was kind of almost tongue in cheek on the third option there, but other than the third option, it's equally intriguing and it's equally bad, whichever one it is.
Right. Another thing is just I'm big into neuroscience, and I think the way it works with this part I'm not so good at, but we have all these neuronal connections, and what we do is we actually preen them, we trim them, and that's how we get smarter. Like when they start out, there's a whole bunch of connections, and then we kind of preen them, and I need to do that with the whole Russiagate thing, like because there's so many storylines I've heard, and I'd like to find out which ones of them I can forget about. Like, Bongino had all kinds of stories about Deripaska, and he had stories about Stefan Halper and about Joseph Mifsud and all these storylines. And I'd like to figure out which ones of them have been debunked and all that. I'm just wondering where a good place to go is for that. Like for example, I heard one about the FBI went into Deripaska's apartment and showed up out of the blue in the morning and were trying to ask him about some Russian or something, and he laughed at them for thinking that, for suggesting that this guy could be some Russian agent, like maybe it was Carter Page or something. And there's Joseph Mifsud. Was Joseph Mifsud, everything about him completely made up by Papadopoulos, and sort of like the FBI kind of got Papadopoulos to say what they wanted? Like, did Papadopoulos make up everything about Mifsud? Like, it sounds to me like this corner thinks that, and I sort of am thinking it sounds like it's the simplest solution is that Mifsud, is just some guy who got framed. Like, he's not some special double agent or anything. Is that one right?
Yeah, you can forget about the Mifsud one. That's exactly right. So that's the one I will say with absolute 100% confidence. Mifsud had nothing to do with anything. He was just a guy. And yes, Papadopoulos framed him, but Papadopoulos was sort of set up by the FBI to frame him. So, if it hadn't been for the FBI pressuring him to come up with some name of some guy somewhere, he probably wouldn't have mentioned Mifsud. So, there's that. But yeah, out of all those theories, Mifsud, just forget about him. That just didn't happen. The Deripaska stuff, I think Deripaska is a huge enigma in all these things, especially because of the connection with Steele. I just think we don't know enough about what exactly was going on there.
Right. And then there's foreign governments. Is Italy involved? Is Australia involved? What was his Downer a white hat? Is he not? Was he I know you point out that he didn't actually show up at the embassy, the US embassy, or communicate with them, or however that was, the day after Trump said, Russia, are you listening? It was actually it was wait a minute, it was after, yeah, or no.
It was before. No, you're right, but it was before.
But then, and I mean, there's just so many lines like this, and I'm trying to figure out who are the white hats. It'd be great if I could just see a list of who the white hats are, who are the the storylines that are debunked. It's just, But anyways, the other things, if I could just quickly get one more in here, just about the trial. So, and about the plea deal, I heard somebody talking about, might have been you, Hans, I can't remember, but it was about, it looks like it's going to go the way of a plea deal. Like this is what like it happens in 90% of trials. Something I'm watching Saul Goodman right now, so that's how much I know about law is just from watching Saul Goodman. It's like, the defense goes up to the prosecution. They try to come up with a plea, and then I don't know if the judge has to agree to it or whatever, all that. But how's that going to happen? Like, I mean, is that going to happen before even next week? Is that going to happen once if they get a few days in? Do they go meet? Does the judge put pressure on Durham to take the plea, or how does that all work? Is that going to happen, and do we want that to happen? Like, I'm assuming we want a trial because we can have some more stuff come out at trial, some more, facts, and then it can like become a broader, a part of the broader conspiracy. Like,
Wait, is trial 1 week from tonight?
Yes, it is.
Sweet.
Yeah, and I don't know if Hans or King, I don't know if you guys want to jump in on that, but I don't see a plea deal happening at this point. I mean, Sussman's latest, he's made his bed and he's going to lie in it. He's going to take this to trial, and on this charged offense, even if he's found guilty, he's really not looking at any jail time. I mean, he might get a couple days in jail, which would be a little bit unusual. I think based on the charge, I don't expect any jail time, but I mean, he's not looking at more than a month or two, even if he's convicted. So he doesn't have a whole lot to lose. I mean, his law license is going to be a little bit of trouble, but there's really no big incentive for him to make a plea deal because, it's just bring the house right down on his head. I mean, if he's found guilty, he's still going to have some allies on the Democrat side. If he takes a plea deal and he has to give up everybody, he's not going to have any friends anywhere. So, especially this late in the game, I don't really see a plea deal getting done.
I'll say so for a plea deal, he has to give people up. He's not just. I mean, no, sorry, a pleading. Like he can't just plead guilty.
Oh, he can always plead guilty. He can't get
in exchange for a lower sentence.
He might get more time off if he gives up a couple of his friends.
Yeah, Durham's not going to make a deal with him. He can always plead guilty, though. And I see we just had a couple filings in the Sussman case. So I'm checking the docket right now.
I mean, my main goal is obviously, I mean, everyone I think here is the same. I mean, we want to find out as much as possible about everything, and we want to have many of the bad guys go to jail as possible.
Never mind, we're good. Sorry, go ahead.
So we want, Durham to be able to, catch as many bad guys as possible. And I thought that maybe by this trial, everything getting really fleshed out at this trial, that might open up more doorways. It has the potential to. And so I don't want to see, I guess, pleading guilty or anything. But I guess that's not what I misunderstood. Someone was talking about a plea deal or something then. But, he can still charge the broader conspiracy. That's totally separate, right? If he has a conspiracy that he wants to allege, or then he can do that, right? Charge a conspiracy, right? Separate of this.
Yeah, Sussman's still at risk for his conspiracy charge.
Right, the overarching conspiracy thing. Okay, well, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
You had that second part of the question. His first question was about like what storylines are true, who's white hat, who's black hat, is Downer a white hat? Anyone got a response to something like that?
No, Downer is just a guy, and I think we've seen again with yesterday's notes that Strzok misrepresented what Downer actually said and what the situation Downer was in. I mean, I don't think folks really understand. Downer is not just some guy.
Can I interrupt with a question about Downer?
Sure, go ahead.
The group he's a part of with all the other English blokes, how do you guys pronounce that? Is it Hacklet? Is it Hacklet?
I think it's Hacklet, yeah.
That was my question.
Right. The thing about Downer is that it was all kind of happenstance how that whole thing happened. I guess first of all, Downer is not just some guy. Downer was the foreign secretary, or a secretary of state equivalent in Australia for like a decade or something. Downer is one of the most famous Australians and has been since the 1980s. He's from a blue-blooded Australian family, which is a very rare kind of occurrence. That doesn't happen much, having these kinds of people. He was the leader of the opposition. He almost became prime minister in the 1990s of Australia. He then, when John Howard became prime minister, he again, went into government. He ended up with the ambassadorship in London, which is how he ended up meeting George Papadopoulos. But even that was sort of semi-happenstance. We don't, this is the point where I really wish George, if you're listening, please just come clean and tell us the truth. George went for drinks with Erica Thompson, who was Downer's assistant, on May 6th, 2016. And for some reason, after those drinks, Erica decided on May 9th at the last moment, and I have the email, I know the email, I know exactly what it says, to say, hey, George, would you mind meeting my boss tomorrow? So we don't know exactly how that happened, so I guess there's some intrigue in that, but it wasn't set up that way. I mean, it happened because Erica was out drinking with George on May 6th. Now, one of the theories that we've had in the corner in the past is that George, said a lot of stupid things on May 6th, and Erica thought Downer should hear those stupid things, so let's kind of rearrange the meeting with him. Or maybe George was just an impressive guy and talked about those connections, and Erica thought, this is actually what her email says, that it would be great for both of them if they just met each other. So I think it was something pretty innocent. The meeting by both people, by both George and Downer's account, was completely innocent. There was no drinking involved. It only lasted for an hour, and they just went their own ways and so on. And of course, Downer never reported it. It wasn't a big deal. So I think that Downer just got caught up in all the hoo-ha, the CNN, the Robbie Mook, all this bullshit in July of 2016 about the hack and this and that. It was like, oh yeah, no, I did hear something about that. Of course, at the time and back in May, what George was talking about was just normal rumors that we'd all heard. And Downer just got the wrong end of the stick and said, oh, I better tell my counterpart over at the U.S. Embassy. So he went over there, and she wasn't actually there. So he had to talk to the substitute person. And then, of course, Gina Halper showed up as well, which isn't helpful in terms of the narrative. But long story short, I don't think Alexander Downer was involved in any of these things. And other than everything I've already said, I think the fact that Peter Strzok keeps lying about what Alexander Downer says proves that Downer is not the bad guy here. It's Peter Strzok who's the bad guy.
Okay, thanks for that, Hans. I'll just shoot it over to Technofog. I'm just kidding. I know he doesn't talk.
Yeah, I was just checking the docket, guys. So we have the proposed jury instructions from, looks like it's the Sussman team that filed it. So that's just kind of reading through that. It's kind of interesting. They're really going for it with these jury instructions. I mean, there's a couple pieces in here that are pretty weird. Trying to get past some pretty standard language, I think, and trying to look past a few issues. Like, they don't want the indictment read; they want it summarized, which is fine. But then, like, on the question of materiality, Sussman tries to limit it, and he tries to slip this in there. I think it goes to the question of whether to initiate an investigation, which is not the only component of why that statement is material. I mean, it's not just a question of whether you initiate an investigation. It's what steps do you take, and what influence does that bear on the Alpha Bank investigation, or even on Crossfire Hurricane as a whole. I mean, if they came to knowledge that Clinton was trying to feed information to the FBI at the same time as Christopher Steele, I mean, there's a certain likelihood that they might have had an opportunity to step back and ask questions about what Christopher Steele was doing too. So I don't see. I hope that one doesn't get in there. Yeah, if you guys have anything else, go ahead. Otherwise, I might take a couple more questions and then wrap this one up. Hey, Will, adding you as speaker. Hopefully, maybe. Might not be. We'll go to the mask. What's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing? Hey, just a quick thing. One of my only comment on Misfoot is that Comey in 2018 was still calling him a Russian spy. And then the other thing about is about that Clinton campaign lawyer who's in charge of special projects. Wasn't the bill that Sussman sent into the Clinton campaign titled Special Project?
I believe it's called Confidential Project.
Confidential Project. Oh, okay. All right. I just thought that it was Project in there, but I thought maybe that might be why Durham was calling her.
Yeah, I have to do a little bit of research on Debbie Fine. I'm not too familiar with what her role really entailed and what the scope of it was.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Really good point about the materiality. You really put your finger right on it. This 21-page jury instruction really comes down to instruction number 6. So Durham wants it to say, a statement is material if it was capable of influencing the FBI. And I would completely agree with that from just a statutory and case law point of view. Remember, Flynn, material, even though the FBI already knew the answer, is entirely theoretical. Anyway, so that's Durham's proposal. Sussman's proposal, as you just said, was it's material. To be material, the statement must be capable of influencing the FBI's decision whether to initiate an investigation, which is extremely detailed. So this is my litmus test for Cooper. So far, I've given Cooper a pass, even though he's an Obama judge. I thought he's been more or less fair. He's certainly always had arguments. He's never just kind of done things. Whichever materiality test he goes with, not only tells us about where Cooper is, it's going to tell us the outcome of this case. I'd put money down on that right now as to whether, if it's one or the other, one wins or the other wins. It's that bad. The difference is that huge. Again, just to reread that. Durham's proposal is a material statement is if it was capable of influencing the FBI. Okay, and I think that's exactly correct. Sussman's test for materiality is the material statement must be capable of influencing the FBI's decision whether to initiate an investigation, which, you can all hear right away, right? Goes right into the weeds of it. That's not materiality. But let's see what the judge says.
Hey, King, did you have any thoughts on that? I might have checked out. Yeah, I think that's exactly
Here I am.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
I forgot to turn my mic on. I'm surprised that Sussman's team has stuck with that definition of materiality from day one, actually. And it's wrong. Legally, it's wrong. Durham has briefed it. All the lawyers on Twitter have commented on it. And case law says basically Sussman is trying to carve up the definition of materiality to mean or to be limited to whether or not an investigation is to be started or not. And that's way too narrow.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? I mean, they bring this data to the FBI, and the FBI is going to look at it, and they're going to take some type of investigative steps. So, to initiate the investigation, well, you'd have to argue anytime they have any type of information that seems credible on its face, the FBI is going to initiate an investigation. But ultimately, I mean, the decisions are much deeper than that, and they're much broader as the government kind of asserts in their element of materiality. So I'm really surprised they went with that one, but that's just you're not winning any points. I think just trying to. I mean, that's too far. There's good lawyering where you're arguing your case, but that's like you're not going to get that through. There's just no way.
Well, we don't know. I mean, that depends
I hope
on
not.
Christopher Cooper. But to me, this is throughout the whole process so far. Again, as I repeat myself, Christopher Cooper has been okay, and surprisingly okay. Again, given that he's an Obama judge. And I've had no issues with him. You know, he's given a few, he's sort of taken away a few. It's just sort of kind of normal. No big issues. This is his litmus test. This is the big one, because this will decide how this whole thing turns out. And of course, as King just said, and as you just said as well, this is the one that's either right or wrong legally. So we know whether he's really on the side of the law or whether he's on the side of Hillary Clinton.
I think it's interesting too that he's probably already read the privileged emails that he's making the ruling on, and how that could sort of color his judgment going forward on just how much deference to give to Sussman. And I mean, these are all lawyers that are sort of involved, and I think there's a natural tendency, especially, you know, he was former DOJ, whatever, that we have to give these people, you know, due respect. And maybe if there's some stuff in these emails that's like, wow, this is absolute bullshit, it might just, you know, affect the way he kind of rules going forward.
Let's see here. Will, I tried to add you as speaker a couple times. I'll do it again. I don't know if there's a technical issue. I'll give that a second. Hey, Will, how's it going?
Mike, you there?
Yeah.
Okay, finally. Just want to ask a quick question. What's the reason that Durham called it a joint venture, not a conspiracy?
I think he's bringing a level of nuance to it in that it's not necessarily a criminal conspiracy. It's a joint venture, which is similar in that you have multiple parties that are working towards a common goal, which is not necessarily a criminal conspiracy. But because you have multiple parties working towards a common goal, he was making an effort to admit those third-party statements and emails going back and forth from like Joffe to Fusion GPS, where Sussman was not necessarily CC'd on those, but because they were all working towards a common goal, Sussman's actions had direct bearing on, and vice versa, bearing on what Sussman was doing. And then Durham was trying to weave that in to admit that into a false statement case. That's my take on it. And Hans or King or anybody else, if you have thoughts, go ahead.
Yeah, the rules of evidence uses the word conspiracy when it talks about a certain exception to the hearsay rule. If you can establish that the communications are in furtherance of a conspiracy, hearsay does not apply. However, case law, particularly in the D.C. Circuit, has held that word is harkens back to an old-fashioned use of the word, which means it's not necessarily a criminal conspiracy, but the equivalent of a joint venture. So they slip in the term joint venture to describe a non-criminal conspiracy for which the hearsay rule does not apply.
One last thing. I thought it was pretty intelligent of George Papadopoulos to leave the 10 grand, behind and not carry it back to the United States. I'm thinking that Papadopoulos has had some, previous, training in counterintelligence. Does anybody have any idea?
Wasn't that debunked? I think the timing didn't right. I think that was some self-serving bullshit by Papadopoulos. The timing didn't seem to line up.
Okay, got it. So, from what I'm gathering, George seems to be telling quite a few tall tales, and he's pretty much relegated to the back burner at this point.
Yeah, no, that's right. So Papadopoulos got poor Charles. Every time I hear this story, I think of poor Charles Tarwell. Charles Tarwell is this guy in Israel who just tried to help him out. He was just desperate and he just needed money, and Charles just gave him 10 grand, and this was on June 2nd or 3rd or something like that of 2017. And then what happened was that Papadopoulos then went over to Greece and had a big party and celebrated and whatever. And then it came, you went into July and, the money was long gone. And by the end of July, so we're talking almost 2 months later, Papadopoulos flew into Dulles, and that's when he was arrested. Now, the whole story about this money, I think he just made it up because the Mueller's people just wanted him to make it up. And the reason why we know that is because Mueller's people put that in the indictment. They put it in there. Well, it wasn't an indictment because he pleaded, but anyway, it was in there. He was like, right at the end, you can see it says, and he was given $10,000 by this mysterious person. So I think Mueller's people were just trying to raise innuendo with the media, and poor Charles Tarwell kind of got dragged into all that.
Okay, so George doesn't seem to be on the up and up at all.
No.
Okay.
We sure would love to look at his communications with Sergei Milian.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. So he might have been playing the other side or both sides.
No, he was just a guy. Look, it's like a 28-year-old guy who gets onto a campaign. I mean, come on, when does that ever happen? That only happened because the Trump campaign was such a mess at the time. No one would ever bring this guy. You remember what he had on his CV? He was on the UN Model United Nations or whatever team. I mean, it was an absolute joke compared to all these other people. But he got on there, and good luck to him. I don't blame him for that. And then he tried to monetize that position, and he did that pretty well. Unfortunately, he kind of overshot the goal at times. Then he got dragged into all this bullshit, and I don't think through any fault of his own. I think that's entirely down to the FBI just being crooks. And then they squeezed him, and then he said stupid things as. Yeah, when they showed up, it says again in the documents released yesterday that he lived in his mom's basement. It literally says that, right? So,
yeah, I saw that.
So when was it, January 27th, the last day of the Danchenko interview, I think which no coincidence again, because they dealt with that problem. Okay, we've gotten, we've moved past that now. Now we can go back to squeezing these other people. 2 agents show up at his mom's house and get him out of his basement, and he made that mistake that we're all told not to make, which is talk to these people. He said, "Oh, sure, I'll talk to you." And it was during that interview, which by the way is recorded, and George has the interview, but he's never released it. That would be very great if he could release it. If he did, unfortunately, I think it will probably have him say a bunch of stupid things. And again, I don't really blame him. You stupidly go into these situations. You tell a few stories, and then you're in trouble, and then you tell a few more stories, and the trouble gets worse. So, I don't think he's a bad guy or whatever. He just got into a bunch of trouble. But to be fair, I think the trouble started on that day. I don't think he did anything wrong whatsoever up until that day. And the only thing he did wrong was to go with these people down to Chicago, downtown FBI, and talk to them. And that's when he said a couple of stupid things.
Okay, got it. Thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
wait a minute.
Oh.
I can't.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think I can let you get away with that. There, George Papadopoulos sold the whole book, I guess, then full of lies, and he's been all over Fox and everywhere telling the story about Mifsud nonstop. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah, those are all lies. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he's a social climber and he's got a little bit of grifter in him. And it's just funny how the parallels between him and Danchenko, they're just both these young, kind of, not the brightest bulbs that are just willing to scrape by and do anything to, move up the ladder, make a buck, whatever. And Carter Page kind of comes off like that. I don't think he's a bad guy, but he's just like the term amiable dunce just kind of occurs to me, that these guys are just not the sharpest knives in the drawer, and they're caught up in this thing that's way above their pay grade.
Yeah, how much is Papadopoulos even hurt this corner? I don't know how much time you guys wasted on it. I don't claim to be part of this corner, but I mean, I've wasted a ton of time with Mifsud crap, and it's all, well, him, like, if he had stopped talking about it, if he hadn't been selling it on Fox after that and everything, and in his book, just like Dan Bongino wasted a huge amount of time on that, for example. Maybe that's why Bongino doesn't talk about this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh yeah, and Chuck Ross. I mean, geez, he still got that thing pinned to his Twitter feed.
If you go back to my Twitter, way back when, I was saying the guy's a grifter and don't believe any of this shit. But look, as I said, I don't have any grudges against the guy. I mean, yeah, no, it's pretty shitty if you bought the book. I didn't buy the book, but whatever, And
I didn't either.
He made some money, and he's still making money because he's still, he retweets that conservative brief or whatever. I don't know what the deal is with that. There's a couple of people out there who retweet that, and it's so shit that I have to assume that they get paid for retweeting it. So I assume he's just got a couple of gigs, and okay, good luck to him. Fine, he also got a lovely wife out of all this. So it's
he has $100 of my money. I for a stupid, worthless book full of lies and his shitty ass signature, and it took forever to get it. And the only good thing I could say is I never read it.
Poor George.
Yeah,
I was giving him a lot more credit than he's worth. All right. Well, poor guy. I wish him well. Yeah, I really do.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Hi, Travis. Whatever your name is.
All righty. Let's see. Let's take one more question, and then I'm going to end the chat after that. Let's go to... Let's go to Weak Cheeks. How's it going? Weak Cheeks, what's up? Oh, I gave you a shot.
Weak Cheeks, come on,
Blew
man.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not so technically hip. Mike, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Hey, how's it going?
Perfect. Thank you. I forgot to press the button. Mic is on. Sorry about that. Hey, I had a question for Hans and Kingmaker. I brought this up a few weeks ago, and because I think both you're lawyers. What is a conspiracy to defraud the United States? And was the Clinton campaign and the FBI and many other people, would they be in a conspiracy to defraud the United States by saying that, bringing all this up, Russiagate, basically they were trying to take a president out of office and they were defrauding the whole United States by doing this? And would that be under that type of, I guess, a federal statute maybe?
Let me take a shot at that. That's very general. The few cases that are brought under that subsection, just a conspiracy to defraud the United States, basically consists of committing fraud against the U.S. government. So, in some material way, that causes the government or an agency to change its course corruptly. So there are elements of that here, particularly if you're looking at inside the government actors. As far as the Clinton campaign and outside actors, an easier claim to prove is the 1001 case that Durham has brought. After the election, however, I've always considered the defrauding the U.S. is a avenue that Durham could pursue, but we have no idea if that's where he's headed. The elements being what they have basically conspired to defraud the U.S. government by corruptly influencing the taking out of a president, say, fraudulently.
I agree. I just wanted to know. I read Hans's stuff all the time. I just wondering if he agreed with that too.
Yeah, no, of course. No, I absolutely agree with that. The main problem is you need to show that these people knew what was going on in any conspiracy. That's the overarching, whatever the conspiracy is. And King, I think, has made this point many, many times. Having a conspiracy is not enough. You need a crime that attaches to the conspiracy. And then you need to prove that all these people were on board with whatever it is that they were trying to do. So in this case, I think I said earlier, I don't think Durham can even prove at this point that Sussman knew that this data was fake. So if you can't prove that it was fake, it's very difficult to implicate him and, a whole bunch of, maybe you can implicate Joffe or some of these other people. It's just very difficult to bring everyone under that umbrella. Of course, unless you have one of these people flip. And I think that's what kind of Durham was hoping for, and that may not have happened, where one of these people says, okay, look, I know what happened. I was at the meeting. They all know. They all whatever. I don't think that happened. Yeah, he's got Laura Segal, but she was very, very recalcitrant in the Alpha case. I mean, she pushed back like no one's business. So the fact
she goes back, there's an email that May 2016 email where she's talking about Alpha. You see that?
Yeah, no, that's right. The fact that Durham has her on board is great, but she might not reach high enough to be able to really unravel a big conspiracy. Yeah, she might get those people that I mentioned earlier. Sussman, Elias, Fritsch, Simpson. Those are kind of the ones that I think Durham is looking at. But anything beyond that, you have to prove. Look at Robbie Mook. Look at his affidavit that he submitted a couple of weeks back. He was like, well, everything was done above board as far as I knew or as far as I was told. So he's going to hide behind that. Sullivan probably going to do the same thing. Podesta did the same thing. He submitted something similar to that. So that's always the problem with trying to prove anything like that. And then moving on to King's point, where you go further, where you defraud the United States in terms of trying to take out a president, the whole 9 yards kind of thing. It's just then at that point you got an intermingling of the FBI and the Clinton campaign. That's the problem at that point. That's a huge problem for Durham, not only in terms of evidentiary and so on, just politically, because suddenly he has to go against Comey and McCabe and all those people. Right now he's really focused on the private people. If he just focuses on, these people brought fake information into the FBI, therefore it was a conspiracy to defraud the FBI and so on. Okay, that is, I think it's a long shot, but it's doable. But if you then go the whole 9 yards and say they wanted to take out Trump, well, now you're into 2017, and you're just on the basis of what we found out yesterday with these handwritten notes, you are then bringing in the FBI. So then everyone's involved. And I just think that's just a step too far for Durham to prove that. I think that did actually happen. I have no doubt that happened. I mean, in my view, the notes yesterday that proved that happened, because the FBI people went into the DOJ on March 6th and basically lied their asses off. Yeah, no, this Carter Page thing. But you know what they said? They said, yeah, the FOIAs have been extremely fruitful. No, they haven't been fruitful. There was nothing there. They talked about Papadopoulos, like about he was paid by the campaign, which is bullshit, and all these other things. They just lied their asses off to the DOJ because they wanted to keep the thing going after Trump tweeted out that he'd been spied on. That was the context for that. But, I don't see Durham going after these people, unfortunately.
I just want to say one last thing, because I think it was March of 2017, allegedly the FBI knew Danchenko's Steele report, reporting to the Steele report was all nonsense, and there was a whole lot of stuff that wasn't working out for the FBI. But why didn't what's his name? When Christopher Wray showed up, why didn't they come out and say that we have proof all this is baloney? But instead, it kept going on for years with Mueller and this whole thing. That's what I'm saying, the conspiracy. In other words, they had proof. They never told the public that all this was BS with Danchenko, and I can't remember all the rest of it. And none of this really was true, but they kept it going for years. That's part of the conspiracy, wouldn't you say?
Of course, it frustrates me to no end. It's incredibly, it's horrible. Christopher Wray goes back a long way with, this is the thing, there was a book written about those three people, Mueller, Comey, and Wray. There's a literal book about these three guys, and it details their friendship. And the book was written, and don't quote me, like 2010, 2011. Anyway, before Wray was appointed, way before Wray was appointed. So again, I ask, who the hell was doing the vetting for Trump? Like, I heard that it was Chris Christie who recommended that guy. Okay, that in itself is like a red flag. Whatever Chris Christie says, don't do it. Okay, that should be the default position. But even if he says something, why the hell don't you have some guy checking up on whether this is actually a good guy? And you've got a book out there that talks about all these people being best friends. So, I never understood that. And I think that the answer is simply that Wray would never, ever throw his friends Comey and Mueller under the bus.
Oh, I agree with you. But at the very beginning, when they picked Mueller as the special counsel, and he was good friends with Comey, when he was friends with the star witness Comey, you knew the whole thing wasn't on the up and up because he should have been picked.
Let me jump in a minute. When you're talking about a conspiracy to defraud the U.S., that as a crime, there's some elements here that are far different than what you see in ordinary everyday politics, with good guys, bad guys, people talking bad against each other, politicians shading the truth to the public. An active scheme to defraud the U.S. has as its aim to obstruct or impair the ability of some governmental function to operate as it's lawfully set up to do. So, and fraud means by deception, by using some means to conceal what you're doing with the aim to obstruct the function of some governmental operation. So it's a very precise criminal act that all these, the way we like to talk about politicians doesn't really apply. So when you talk about Comey doing something, you're going to have to prove that he made some act, committed some overt act in furtherance of a design to impair the function of a governmental agency. So if he creates a bunch of documents and gives them to his subordinates at the FBI and send them off on a wild goose chase, knowing that they're going off on a wild goose chase. That could be conspiracy. That could involve frauding the U.S. And if you're engaged in a conspiracy to do that, you have a conspiracy to defraud the United States.
Right, but I
It's
agree with you.
something you have to point to something specific that they.
Well, the conspiracy is they were the Clinton people and the FBI and the DOJ people. They were trying to nullify the election.
That's too general.
That's too general.
That's just too general. You have to get down to some specific series of overt acts that's designed to stop the government from functioning or obstruct the government from functioning.
You don't think this? You don't think this obstructed the government from functioning for 3 years?
That happens all the time. I mean, the Congress
not like this with every day. The president's going to be arrested at any moment.
It does happen all the time. You have agencies that essentially are grind to a halt because of debates going on forever. Obstructionist tactics, but those are not concealed. They're not deceitful. They don't rise to the level of criminal activity. You have to get something specific. I always point to, on this point, the falsification or the misleading pleadings filed in the FISA court to renew the Page warrant. That's one, obstruction of justice, but two, it could rise to the level of a conspiracy to defraud the U.S. because there's deception. It's designed to create a result from a governmental agency or a court in that case that otherwise would not have happened but for a fraud. So you have to put it down, bring it down to the level of specific criminal conduct designed to put a big wrench into the government and do it deceptively.
Alrighty. I think I'm going to go ahead and end it here. One thing I'd point out, I mean, I would just remind everybody to keep in mind David Dagan. With him getting immunity, I mean, that is not relevant to the Sussman case. So, there is something that John Durham was working towards. And he's not somebody that just gives out immunity. So, whatever piece of information David Dagan had is going to be significant, and that's going to be used somewhere. So I would expect there to be another indictment or two that come. And I think whenever we get that, that's going to be extremely informative, and we're going to learn probably more in the next indictment. Hopefully it's another speaking indictment, but we're probably going to learn more in that than we have throughout the entirety of Russiagate, which is saying a lot now. So we'll definitely try to continue doing shows. Obviously, the trial starts next week. We are not going to get audio of that, but we're going to get probably some stories and some transcripts, and we should be able to kind of be able to talk through it. So as best as we can, we'll try to do a few shows, and I don't know what we'll do the rest of this week. I don't know if we'll do another show or not, but appreciate everybody coming on tonight, and we will schedule something, I'm sure, in the future. So thank you to everybody for coming tonight. Thank you to all of our speakers, and I am going to end it here. All right. Have a good night, guys.